This is the morning session on December, what day is it today? December 6th, 2017. Welcome, everybody. Carla, please call the roll.
Udaly. Fritz.
Here.
Fish. Saltzman.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Good morning, everybody. The purpose of council sessions is to hear items and hear from the public. The watchword is respect. You'll hear opinions up here that don't necessarily agree with your own, but we ask everybody to listen. I have found many times when I listen to opinions that are different from my own, I learn something. So let's treat everybody with respect. Let's have everybody have the opportunity to hear and be heard. When you come up for public testimony, you'll have 3 minutes to testify unless we have to shorten it for any reason. I don't think we do today. And when you're 2.5 minutes into your testimony, a yellow light will go off in front of you. When your time is up, you'll hear the beeps and the red light will go. We ask you to please stop at that particular time. Anybody who disrupts the council session will be asked, obviously, to stop doing so. If you continue to do so, you'll be asked to leave, and then if you don't leave, you're subject to arrest for trespass. And I have to say that because that's our legal notice. Hopefully we don't have to do that today. There's a lot of interesting items on the agenda. If you are a lobbyist, we ask that you disclose that per council rules. If you're here representing an organization, that's also helpful to know. We ask that people not shout or yell or clap or things like that. Just a simple thumbs up if you support something or a thumbs down. If you don't like it, that tends to work. And so with that, we will get to our first items. Our first items are called communications. These are items where people have signed up in advance to be able to address the council on any items that they would like to do. And then later on, you'll have the opportunity to testify, to sign up to testify today on first readings of reports, resolutions and ordinances. If you feel so compelled to do that, you can see Carla and she'll direct you on how best to be signed up. You don't need to state your whole address for the record. It's simply just state your name if you're so inclined. With that, we'll get right to communications. First item, please.
1277, request of Injured and Pissed Off to address council regarding Hope in Motion documentary.
Good morning.
My name's Injured and Pissed Off, and I'm here to talk about the documentary that Christopher Reeves made before he passed away. It was called Hope in Motion. He stated that there's 100 million people that have incurable diseases. I don't know if people had heard that before or not, but it's a DVD that's for sale online, or I assume still so, because I was able to find 2 copies of it. That 100 million people that have incurable diseases, there's like 60 million plus that's mental illness. And the rest of the 40 million, supposedly. Of course, that movie was made quite a few years ago. I don't know when he died, but I'm sure that there's been more people with mental illness and other incurable diseases since then. And of course, to have an incurable disease, well, it's got to be diagnosed by medical doctors, and not just one, but more than a few. And if a man ever spoke anything that was honest or truthful, his words, if people didn't know, his wife died also from cancer. I'm talking about Christopher Reeves' wife. And then, of course, one friend of his that they commented about, Robin Williams, well, he killed himself. It's 1 in 3 people in the United States that live with an incurable disease. Now, I wish that Nick Fish was here to hear this. I'm assuming that he'll find out eventually. That's the purpose of this. Robin Williams, well, he killed himself, and he wasn't, I'm sure, the only one that knew Christopher Reeves. That's a terrible situation to be in, of course. And there's another 10,000 people a year that have spinal cord injuries, which figures up, if you do the math, that it figures up to more than 200 people a week. And we've had spinal cord injuries, Mr. Mayor. I've got 2 fractures to my spinal cord. There's another, they call them incomplete fractures. Those total from 2,000 to another 10,000 people a year. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks for bringing the documentary to our attention. I look forward to seeing it. Next individual, please.
Item 1278, request of Mimi Gurman to address council regarding the right to petition my government.
Good morning.
Hi. My name is Mimi Gurman, and I'd like to state for the record that Chloe Eudaly is again not here for my testimony. I have 2 poems in honor of Chloe Eudaly, since she loves my poems so much, today for my testimony. The first one is called Mr. Wheeler. I send him poems to remind him that reality lurks between the silences of words. He reads them, says thank you, that he likes them. Outside the hungry huddle, wondering if this day will succumb them to death's forever night. I sent him poems about the earth, farming, love, the heavens, gods, and disbelievers. Anything to remind him to inhale the acrid scent of silence, to touch the solitary icicle tears on park benches below the cluster of umbrella trees. He reads each word, each poem, and dutifully, with the lap napkin upbringing that old money buys, he says thank you. Stranded shadows in the doorways haunt, and discarded blankets on benches beseech. I will send him poems again today. Poem number 2. Help me to understand. Help me to understand why you carry guns and I carry blankets, or why cops murder children and cities murder the unhoused. Help me to understand why you have a roof while others get an overpass, or why simply existing with no place to go warrants arresting the houseless and refusing them rest. Help me to understand why money flows for developers, yet city coffers are hollowed of food and shelter for people, or why black is to fear and white is to embrace. Help me to understand the hatred that pours from these halls, drowning the soul of this city in poverty, or why your garden grows manicured obsessions, while ours toxic compost from your unsustainable incompetence. Help me to understand why the fabric of the flag hasn't burned beneath your feet for punishing the houseless for existing, or how one values money but never a poem. Help me to understand how you are mistaken and delusional, thinking that we'd elected you kings and queens. Help me to understand why Chloe Eudaly platformed a white supremacist twice but calls herself an activist, why we still don't know if she paid taxes on her crowdfunding money for her bookstore, or why she berates us for not doing our homework about her nephew, whom she says was shot by cops, although there's no information to be found on him, and when we find nothing, we're told it's none of our business. Help me to understand why Eudaly can walk out or not show up repeatedly for public testimony denying us of our First Amendment rights to petition our government, our entire government, or why she can bully and intimidate constituents through Facebook yet still sit in that chair. Help me to understand why the city attorney is protecting Eudaly by denying public records requests, or why City Council at large is allowing Chloe Eudaly to walk out, play hooky, or disappear during public testimony on a routine basis. Help me to understand why Commissioner Eudaly is still a commissioner on the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Next individual, please.
Item 1279, request of Josh Maurice to address council regarding strategies for constructing optimal futures.
Good morning.
Morning. I'm Josh Maurice. Last time I gave a communication, one of these 3-minute communications, was 2 years ago at the other meeting place across the river where they have it on Thursdays. And I talked about what I've now been calling, sometimes referring to as the cooperative tiny home village phenomenon. At that time, 2 years ago, a third village had just started, and now we have 4 in Portland. And I've personally, over the last 6 months or so, had the great fortune to be able to be really personally involved in this. And so I want to express and testify that I find this very, very significant and hopeful, positive trend and phenomenon, which can hopefully be expanded upon expeditiously. We have a very interesting little ecosystem of villages now with these 4. They each have their own kind of unique character, and we all learn from each other and share information and resources. I really want to thank everyone who's helped make it possible. You know, my fellow villagers, all the volunteers who come and lend their time and resources and know-how, and city people who've helped a lot with sanitation, reducing fire hazards, clearing brush, and so on and so forth. It's still I think, to some extent, a fairly controversial phenomenon in many ways. But I think, it helps to have an idea of where this is all going. People are a little uneasy about where it's going. You know, it's fairly new and different, and there's so much more to say about it, but the last thing I'll mention is if we would like to have a framework for a future paradigm that this may be kind of prefiguring, there's a website I'd like to just mention that does that in a way that I think is pretty robust and salient. I'll just spell out the address, zhergish.wixsite.com/zherg. So zhergish.wixsite.com/zherg. And I could go on and on, but that will have to do it for now. Thank you very much, everybody.
We sure appreciate it. Thank you for coming in. Next individual, please.
Item 1280, request of Joe Walsh to address council regarding communication.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice. I would ask a little patience. I'm having a lot of trouble with my throat. Good morning. I am Joe Walsh, and I represent Individuals for Justice. And we take no money from this body or other government bodies. We think you should require all people that represent nonprofits to make that statement or explain how much they do take from you so we know what's what and what the agenda is. So our agenda may be hostile, but it's honest. No money involved. We come today to talk about the abuse of office and not telling the truth. We have been criticized by Commissioner Udaley as being unprepared when coming before this council. We strongly disagree. Time remaining does not allow us to list all of the suggestions that we have offered, but here's just a few. For the cold weather, we asked the mayor on a number of occasions to get warming buses to put outside this building. If you had 2 warming buses out there, you could probably seat, what, 100 people? I don't think that would happen. But the really neat thing about warming buses is you can move them. So if the first couple of times you don't get a lot of people, you might pick another spot like the county building. Those buildings, these 2 buildings that I'm talking about, are centrally located on the east side and the west side, and people know where they are. We suggested that, and that was rejected over and over again. It's amazing. When I talk to people about that, they say, that's a good idea. So simple. Hey, TriMet, how about putting a couple of buses over here? Have the police and fire department make up a current list of where people can go to get warm. We had problems on the street last year where the cops wouldn't get out of their damn cars. Not only did they not have a list, and they weren't helping people, but when the cameras were there, they were sure out of their cars. And they had really good stuff in the back. Photo ops. Attending city council meetings, we suggested that you extend the time to sign up. And Mary, who is here today, Mary and I disagree on a lot of stuff, but she suggested a really neat thing. How about just expanding it to 10 people? 30 minutes, that's all we're asking the citizens. So you say you can't say to us, hey, you're not giving us any suggestions. Because I could go on for a half hour, but I would go to jail. Because Republicans send people to jail, Mayor, and you are a Republican, right?
That's not correct.
I know. You changed it to Democrat to win this office, but you are a Republican. Is that correct?
I was in
Yes, and once a Republican,
in 1995.
always a Republican, and you act like a Republican.
Right. Thanks, Mr.
Why
Walsh.
don't you meet with us and ask us for some more suggestions? You did it twice, and then you ran away.
Mr. Walsh.
And hid in the closet.
Mr. Walsh,
Yes.
you've made your point. I got your email. Thank you.
You really did.
I did. I read
I thought
it.
you were in Chicago.
I was in Chicago, but they have email there too.
You must have felt at home. Al Capone.
All right, thanks.
Great.
So let me please respond to a couple of the points you've made, because you've made some good ones. You've made some I don't agree with, but you've made some good ones. First of all, with regard to the warming buses, last year we did, in fact, have an agreement with TriMet that if the warming buses were needed as a result of us not being able to get shelter space online, they would
8
be
people
provided.
died last year, Mayor.
4
Did
did,
you
and
not
that's
need
for,
it?
excuse me, can I please respond? I listened to you, now
Don't
let me,
bullshit me.
I'm not bullshitting you, I was
Yes,
just
you are.
responding. So, second of all, if
8 people
anybody,
died last
excuse
year,
me,
And you're telling me
excuse
you
me.
didn't need warming buses?
excuse me, last year,
No, I won't
we,
excuse you. They're dead.
Mr. Walsh, please sit down.
They're dead.
I'm trying to respond and you're not letting me, so please sit down. You're done. Next item, please.
Item 1281.
Republican.
Request of Neil H. Walker to address council regarding Portland Police idea about sidewalk safety.
Thank you. And while he is coming up, I will remind people we have a no turn-away policy during severe weather issues. That was true last year. It will be true this year. If you come across somebody who is outside during a severe weather incident, call 911. Please stay with them. If they are not, if it is not a severe situation, but they are cold and they would like to come inside, call 211. 211, excuse me. During a severe, Mr. Walsh, please let me finish, all right? I listen to you, now listen to me. If you don't stop, I'm going to ask you to leave. Any rate, for the rest of the people who actually do want to hear this information, if you want to know where the shelters are that are available, call 211. They have will have a complete list during severe weather situations. If there is somebody who needs to be checked up on, please call the non-emergency police number. That's 503-823-3333. And again, this year we will have the same policy. And we'll just take a moment while Mr. Walsh calms himself down.
I control me.
Mr. Walsh, we want you to be able to stay, so please. We want you to be able to stay. Next individual, please.
He does not appear to be here. Mr.
I'm sorry.
Walker?
Is Mr. Walker here? If he's prepared to listen, yeah, absolutely, he can stay. But if he's not going to listen, he can't. If he's okay, great. Item 1282. We don't have enough people for the consent. 1282, please.
1282, adopt the allocation methodology for the local transportation infrastructure charge, establish a maximum fee, amend charge required code, and direct staff to develop additional components of neighborhood streets program.
Very good. Commissioner Saltzman.
Thank you, Mayor. With Portland growing by leaps and bounds and the pace of infill development on unimproved streets increasing, it was clear to transportation staff and the past city council that policies around building complete and connected improvements were not keeping up. For perspective, 50 miles of Portland's streets are dirt and gravel, and another 200 miles are under-improved streets. And these problem streets are located across the city. So this is not an east side or a west side problem. It is a Portland problem and something that needs to be addressed. To that end, the City Council adopted a local transportation infrastructure charge, or LTIC, in April of 2016, and directed staff to come back to Council with a methodology on how to spend those funds. In the subsequent year and a half, it became clear that the real-world situations were making the LTIC unreasonable in certain situations, and therefore some type of cap or maximum charge was needed. Therefore, Council is being asked to consider three things this morning. The first is to adopt a maximum charge for the local transportation infrastructure charge. The second is to adopt a methodology for the LTIC. And the third is to direct staff to continue to develop the neighborhood streets framework.
This shouldn't take very long. We have to decide.
So it's important that we take time to review the effectiveness and rationality of the proposal. And over the past 18 months, transportation staff have been doing exactly that and are now before us with an updated rate and methodology for our consideration. Staff will give us a short presentation, and it is a bit dense, but I feel it is appropriate as it is such an important program, and interested members of the public should understand all the thinking and analysis that went into the proposal. And following that, we'll open it up for testimony, and I would also, so I'll turn it over now to Ann Hill and Kurt Kruger, who will make the presentation, but I also wanted to move an amendment that will provide an exemption for affordable housing. This was something we intended to do, but somehow got left out of the mix, so I would now move that
Commissioner,
amendment.
can we suspend the rules for a second? I apologize for being late. I had a doctor's appointment. I walked in with some people who are here for the consent agenda, Mayor. I understand this will be about an hour, hour and a half. Could we suspend the rules and do the consent agenda adoption just so they can be excused?
Any objections? Hearing none, please call the roll. First of all, are there any items pulled from the consent agenda?
I had no request.
Call the roll.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Wheeler.
All right, consent agenda is adopted.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Mayor.
Again, I'll turn it over to Ann Hill and Kurt Kruger for the staff presentation.
So I'll second your amendment for the purpose of putting it on the
okay.
table.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Saltzman, Mayor Wheeler, and the rest of City Council. We have a comprehensive presentation for you today on this important issue. My name is Ann Hill, and I work for the Portland Bureau of Transportation as a program manager in the Development, Permitting, and Transit section. Today, I will provide some background, review the LTIC collections and maximum proposal, provide findings from our public outreach that inform the allocation methodology, and additional neighborhood street framework elements. I will then close the presentation and open it up for questions. So how big is this problem? This map right here that you have on your screen shows the red are those street segments that are LTIC eligible, meaning this is where the charge occurs. It has been decades in the making, resulting from annexation. Large portions of the city were built many decades ago when local street standards may have been different, and when most of these areas were unincorporated county land where street standards were very different. As the land was annexed into the city, these rural county roads were now inside city limits, but with no decision on if they should be improved and who should pay for those improvements. There has been a long-standing policy that frontage improvements are the responsibility of property owners. This has resulted in a development-driven process where new development must build their own street improvements consistent with city code. This development-driven nature of the city code did not align well with infill development. Many developers said that it didn't make sense for them to build a 30 or 50-foot long segment of road or sidewalk in the middle of a paved or gravel street. In certain situations, the city agreed with the developers. While Portland has had these 250 miles of unimproved residential side streets for decades, there has always been a desire to see these streets improved, but the city has historically not allocated significant resources to these projects. That's because the cost of the city's backlog of transportation projects is far greater than our available transportation funding. This requires the city to prioritize transportation investments, and the city has done so with grants and opportunities that prioritize projects that carry more people, shift modes, and achieve the goals of Vision Zero. The LTIC was developed to specifically address one aspect of the city's problem with unimproved residential side streets: the fact that infill development was occurring throughout the city and in many situations was not contributing anything to solve the city's infrastructure problem other than signing waivers of remonstrance. The LTIC guaranteed that all new development would contribute to solving the problem through paying a fee unless frontage improvements were made on site. The LTIC is not an in lieu of fee, it's not a tax, and it's not an SDC. Instead, the LTIC is a transaction fee. Applied to single dwelling zones on local service streets, the charge of $600 per linear foot based on the total linear frontage of the property adjacent to the local service traffic street. ADUs, disaster replacement, alterations, and property line adjustments are exempt. And we have, as Commissioner Saltzman introduced, we are including affordable housing to the list of exemptions in this code update. So how much have we collected? So since July of 2016, we've collected, this map shows 1.8 million has been collected since July, and as of this morning, it's 2.2 million has been collected, which is an average of about $122,000 a month. The estimated cost to improve all 250 miles of unimproved local residential streets is $1.5 billion. That calculates to $6.3 million per mile. Thus, the LTIC revenue by itself will only be sufficient to address a very small fraction of the city's unimproved local service streets. When the city adopted the LTIC, the City Council directed that all LTIC revenue be held in a lockbox until the council approved the allocation methodology to specify how decisions will be made on the expenditures of the LTIC. And that's why we're here today. So before I talk about the allocation methodology, I do want to touch upon the LTIC maximum that we're proposing today. Based upon a comprehensive review of building permits subject to the LTIC, PBOT found the LTIC to pose a financial impediment to residential development for a small subset of properties with abnormally large frontages on unimproved streets, especially corner lots. The LTIC maximum establishes zone-specific per lot maximum numbers to the LTIC. While it is anticipated that revenue could be impacted by approximately 25%, because many projects are currently on hold resulting from this fee, we anticipate some of those projects being implemented, thereby neutralizing the impact of this maximum. Upon your approval, beginning in January 2018, the LTIC maximum would be, as we show on this chart, there would be no maximum in R2.5. R5 would be $30,000.
So for people watching this who aren't necessarily down with the lingo, could you just add one more sentence and explain what the difference is between these zones so
Sure.
people understand?
Sure, and I'm going to defer, that's why my friend Kurt is here, who
right, good,
does
thanks.
development permitting, so that he can put this, translate.
Good morning, Kurt Kruger with the Office of Transportation. Thank you, Mayor. An R5 lot is roughly in the inner east. R5, 5,000 square foot, single family dwelling lot. R7 is roughly a 7,000 square foot. Likewise, an R10 is a 10,000 square foot. And then we have a few R20 and RF, which are much larger. But again, these are all single family dwelling parcels.
Great, thank you.
Next. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit to the public outreach and the engagement. So moving on from the maximum, I'm going to touch on what we've been doing with public outreach, the process, and our results. As I said, with only LTIC funds, we could only improve approximately a quarter mile of a street each year citywide. And even if we just did sidewalk improvements, say pedestrian improvements, again, we wouldn't be able to make much of an impact when we're looking at 250 miles of streets needing to be improved. So with so many streets and such limited resources, the team completed a year-long public involvement process to better understand what Portlanders think about residential unimproved streets and how best to improve them. The results of this extensive public involvement process underpin the recommendations for the allocation methodology in front of you today and the Neighborhood Streets Net framework. The team set out to involve the community in developing a program with goals for a process to be equitable, transparent, defensible, and values-based. Furthermore, the involvement process centered on providing access to decision-making by directly engaging persons with disabilities, communities of color, and those who speak other languages than English. So as you can see on this slide, or for those of you who are not looking at the actual presentation, we not only did we do the traditional outreach of neighborhood meetings, coalition meetings, appearing at modal committee meetings and stakeholder groups, we also engaged 30,000 individuals using Facebook with our survey. We mailed to all 28,000 residents that live on these unimproved streets, inviting them to focus groups where we had people sit in groups of 12 so that we could ask questions to them and get their feedback. We got an additional 3,000 community survey participants, including translating the survey into 5 different languages. We did brief, this number says 17 briefings to neighborhood coalitions, associations, and stakeholder groups. That number is actually, I think, 20. In the month of October, we did do a final round to key coalitions, the Development Review Advisory Committee, the Bureau Budget Advisory Committee of PBOT, and we also presented to the Portland Disability Commission. And then we also had 131 participants in the focus groups. So through these objectives, we engaged thousands of Portlanders coming from many backgrounds and varied perspectives. The proposed program is a direct reflection of the community's values, concerns, and priorities.
So how long has this proposal been out for public review?
The proposal has been out since September.
This version of it?
Yeah.
So that's what everybody reviewed when they went to the meetings?
Right, and the allocation methodology has been a 3-step methodology, which you'll see, which we've been showing people since actually June.
So then, how did their turning up at the meetings make any difference if it's the same proposal that was on the table in September?
People asked questions depending on the neighborhoods. And when we get into the allocation methodology, we can talk a little bit about that. I think the biggest impact was how we looked at the framework for the additional neighborhood streets program elements. Because there's not enough money to really make a substantial impact in any of these neighborhoods, we do have a proposal here for the council to direct PBOT to look at, for example, how we can maintain the 50 miles of gravel streets, how we can continue to look at neighborhood collectors to provide sidewalk pedestrian improvements, how we can make the LIDs something that would be more accessible to Portlanders. So those proposals really came out of the feedback that we got from
in terms of
the residents.
The proposal on the table, no changes based in this proposal based on what's been discussed in the community?
No, but quite honestly, we didn't, I mean, the suggestions we got were keep the money in the geographic areas. So that was one proposal we've gotten. The other one was spend the money on collectors. That was the second one. And the third one that we've heard is make sure that we're making pedestrian improvements. So we're using alternative street standards to encourage pedestrian improvements. We haven't said that you can't do neighborhood collectors in the allocation methodology, but we also know that we need to put more money towards that program itself. And in terms of the geographic allocation, the way that the money was collected, that wasn't something that was prescribed, but in the end, the way that we have allocated our proposal for 2018 would actually allocate the money geographically. So we have met the feedback that we've heard.
Okay, thank you.
So this is a little bit about what we've heard on the slide. We've heard that local streets provide citywide benefits, that the city should pay, not homeowners. We heard actually that stormwater is the #1 priority for these streets. Second is streetlights. So sidewalks was not in the top 2. It was a priority, but not the #1. We must protect low and fixed income households when we look at how we're going to both allocate the funds. We have to support alternate street standards, so that's
Wait, can we pause there for a second?
Sure.
I just want to know, will you be in your presentation responding to the letter we got from the Office of Equity and the Ombudsman?
That was in direct response to the LTIC maximum, which I just covered. If we like to talk about that more, we are.
Well, so at some point, I mean, I'll ask you at the appropriate time.
Sure.
Just to summarize the concerns that were raised, and then how this proposal addresses those concerns, including the hardship waiver.
Sure. So Kurt will, I'm going to defer to Kurt to answer those questions because I know that gets technical in terms of the administrative
And I don't want to
pieces.
screw up your presentation,
Okay.
so I just want to know at some point that will be addressed and you'll give us a response.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm just going to quickly complete this slide here. So we wanted to prioritize those underserved communities where we historically have not made the investments necessary. We need to focus on safety and traffic calming. So Commissioner Fritz, that was another thing we consistently heard of, was that if we're going to improve these streets, we need to make sure there's traffic calming elements on all of these street improvements. And we need to invest in the existing dirt and gravel roads. So today, we are asking support, again, for 3 different pieces. One is the LTIC maximum. That's what Commissioner Fish just asked about. The second is the allocation methodology for the funds themselves. And then we staff are adding the neighborhood street framework, which I'll talk about in a bit. So if we start with the neighborhood streets framework here to just sort of ground what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the presentation, we really have 4 elements which we think will cohesively address the 250 miles of streets. The first, of course, is the blue area, which I'm going to talk about. That's the LTIC financed improvements, or the allocation methodology. The second one, if we go clockwise, is an ongoing maintenance program for grade and gravel streets. The third one is to really focus on the neighborhood collector pedestrian improvements. And finally, the residential LID enhancements, which I'll talk about. So if we begin with the LTIC financed improvements, as we developed the allocation strategy, the team used the outreach process to answer a series of questions on your screens related to finance and budgeting, what types of streets they wanted to live on, so pedestrian treatments, traffic calming, and how to select the projects themselves. Their feedback was used to develop a set of clear and equitable principles to guide future decisions on funding allocations, street standards, along with the allocation methodology for the project selection. So quickly, I just want to touch on the financing and then also the street standards before we dig into the allocation methodology. So beginning with financing and budgeting, in recognition of the magnitude of stormwater volume that originates from streets, the portion of capital costs for local street improvements related to stormwater management and the limited availability of these LTIC funding relative to the total costs of improving Portland's unimproved local street network, the Bureau of Environmental Services, or BES, is partnering with PBOT on LTIC-funded projects. Any BES funding contributions would be directed towards stormwater system benefits. This partnership will include a finance structure that will accelerate project timing and provide long-term program certainty and will not require property owner contributions. By partnering with BES, combining resources citywide rather than geographically segregating pots of money, the city may be able to improve 1.5 to 3 miles of streets every 10 years. So the current proposal would be, once the allocation methodology is approved, BES and PBOT and OMF would come up with, we would select the projects, PBOT and BES, and then return to the neighborhoods affected to make sure that those were the best use of funds. We would then select the best financing option. What we're currently looking at is potentially looking at a bond, so $10 million worth of improvements that we would use the LTIC and the BES revenues to pay off. Once it was paid off, we would then select another round of projects and finance those. That way we could get $10 million worth of projects out the door instead of waiting for this money to slowly collect. That proposal, though, to come back, we would, of course, come back to council with that bonding proposal in the future. So we're not going to talk much today about that piece. The second piece that we did talk about with the community was the types of streets that the city would complete. So since council has adopted alternate transportation and stormwater standards to be used on select streets, and community feedback supported a desired flexibility when addressing safety, mobility, and feasibility, the LTIC-funded projects will use a standard strategy adopted from the Tryon-Stevens neighborhood plan to match the best option to the street segment being reviewed. After all, not every street needs 2 sidewalks, and a traditional street standard, however, stormwater and traffic calming elements are the priority. Now that, note that this is only the first page of a 2-page flowchart that you see in front of you, where the second page determines what stormwater conveyance methods should be used for each street. And finally, with the financing model and street standards matrix in place, the third leg was the design of the allocation methodology for project selection. So this approach is proactive, allowing the city to identify and implement where those high priority improvements should be. The methodology is intended to be repeatable, anticipating recurring rounds of capital investments in future years as funding is available. This methodology will stay consistent with the city's equity goals, ADA requirements, and adopted neighborhood transportation and stormwater plans. It responds to public input, seeks to leverage other available funding sources, and uses the best available data and methods for identifying high-priority transportation and stormwater improvements. Again, once the methodology is applied, PBOT and BES will identify where within the LTIC fund budget to fund missing links in connectivity to enhance the other capital projects occurring in targeted areas to be considered, such as greenways or safe routes to school investments. The LTIC allocation methodology establishes 3 fundamental criteria to determine a short list of the highest priority unimproved local residential projects to be funded. The first criteria is equity. To prioritize improvements in areas with high concentrations of underserved populations to ensure that everyone has access to opportunities necessary to satisfy their essential needs, advance their well-being, and achieve their full potential. Portlanders supported prioritizing projects in underserved communities. This was reinforced by results of the online community survey and was especially true for Portlanders who responded to the survey in language other than English. The second criteria
Before you move
is...
on, if I just have a question. The city's racial equity policies address race and disability. Does this take into account also areas where there are more people with disabilities?
So when we looked at, and I can get into how we were looking at equity for the 2018 proposed allocation, but yes, when I talked to the disability, the Commission on Disability, we did discuss this. Currently, the 3 steps that we are using for equity for 2018 would be income, communities of color, and renters, because those are vulnerable communities, those 3. We did talk about how currently right now we don't have data that actually shows where the disability community lives. And as I talked to the commission, they also talked about how while there's places where people live, it's also where people are moving around the city. And so we really needed the focus to be to make sure that all of the projects that we work on make sure that we address accessibility, not just the ADA requirements, but that we really look at like what does accessibility mean on a alternative pedestrian treatment, for example, that there might not be a requirement, but we need to make sure that it is something that will meet the accessibility community's needs.
Okay, that's one of the concerns I have, so I want to discuss that
Sure.
more. Thank you.
Sure. The second criteria is effectiveness. So to prioritize projects that support connectivity and fill critical gaps in the city's transportation and stormwater infrastructure. So residents on unimproved streets that participated in the focus groups placed a high priority on projects that will make the most positive impact on the transportation and stormwater systems. So effectiveness for transportation emphasizes connectivity, roadways that can serve as safe, ADA accessible, multimodal connections to neighborhood parks, school, transit, and nearby amenities. And finally, the third criteria is efficiency, to prioritize projects that are consistent with adopted plans, informed by the results of robust community involvement efforts, cognizant of other related improvements occurring in the city, and that make efficient use of limited resources by leveraging other funds. So to sort of make this 3-step process make a little more sense with context, we decided we would show you how we would plan to do this for 2018. So this is what the next slide shows you. So what you see on this slide right now is the allocation methodology establishes the long-term guiding principles for project selection. So when you look at number 1, which is equity, the shaded areas on this map, the dark gray areas show where the 3 criteria that I just mentioned. So we use those criteria from the transportation system plan. So that was income, communities of color, and renters. And we did this at the block data level, not at the census tract data, because we heard in neighborhood meetings that a lot of times the census tract data waters down, because the areas are too big, it waters down some of the equity, the underserved communities, so we used block data, so it was more granular. The darker areas on the map, the dark gray, show where it has 2 or 3 of those equity factors, and the areas that are the lighter colors show where there's either 0 or 1 equity factor. The second, so we took that, and then on top of that, we overlaid
So
the-
before you go on, please.
Sure.
For instance, for the Tryon-Stevens Southwest block, it's really obvious that the most vulnerable people are not in the proposal. I do appreciate you showing the southerly part of Southwest Portland. However, where the plan was done for Tryon-Stevens is not where the highest concentration of the most vulnerable people are.
Actually, when we get to the Tryon-Stevens map, there actually are 2 segments within Tryon-Stevens in that plan that do meet that criteria. But we can absolutely discuss that more in a minute.
Because if, so this is actually not necessarily showing efficiency. This is showing where we've got the planning maps, where we've done the study.
Sure, so the first step was equity, and then the second step we used was effectiveness.
I see.
And what we did with the effectiveness is we selected 4 connectivity factors, so safe routes to schools, bike routes, pedestrian routes, and proximity to transit. So specific metrics for determining stormwater priorities are yet to be determined, awaiting the refinement of new spatial data sets for stormwater infrastructure on residential side streets. So we scored the segments that you see there, 0 to 5, based on the number of effectiveness factors they meet. So for proximity to transit, a street is awarded 1 point if proximate to a non-frequent service transit stop, or 2 points if proximate to a frequent service transit stop. So projects must score a 4 or a 5 to be considered. So the darker segments would be the ones that would be considered in this round. And then finally, so once we did the first step and the second step, we still had way more streets than we could ever invest the resources that we have available in. So we had to figure out how can we further narrow the lens of where we can actually look at where we make some of these improvements. So together with the community, PBOT had developed 3 neighborhood street plans, Cully, Division Midway, and Tryon-Stevens, focusing on quiet residential streets. These plans were unique in that they developed strategies for improving local traffic streets rather than arterial streets in single-family neighborhoods. These 3 neighborhood street plan areas have a concentration of unpaved substandard streets. All 3 of these areas contain multiple miles of unimproved residential side streets that are also high priorities for transportation connectivity. So long-term, multiple recurring rounds of capital projects will be selected using a 3-stop methodology. However, for subsequent rounds, the metrics for each step, so the criteria we would use for equity or the criteria we would use for efficiency would be determined at that point in time, because 10 years from now, we might have a completely different way we're looking at equity than we are today. So we didn't want to become so prescriptive in what specific metrics we would use. We instead wanted to say, you have to first start with equity and then move to connectivity and finally to how you would select the projects.
And if you have all 3 of those, is there anticipated to be enough money in the funds to do them all?
So I actually have these maps, we can actually look smaller. So when we look at Cully here, so again, 1 would be the equity score. So the gray, the darker area there is within the boundary of that Cully plan. That area scored 2 to 3 on equity. And then you can see all the different street segments within there in that area. Again, we have a lot more streets than we could do. So we would then have to further work with PBOT, BES, and the neighborhood to determine which would be the most optimal segments and how much money we had to actually make key improvements. Moving to Division
Can we
Midway.
move off of that?
Can we go back to Cully for a sec? Mayor has a
Sure.
question, then I have a
Sure.
question.
So I'm just looking at this map here. How, efficiency is obviously part of the game. How efficient is it to not do an entire area? I assume beyond the orange here, there are a number of unpaved streets that don't meet the other 2 criteria. So you're effectively creating islands in an area that you're rehabilitating. Is that effective as a strategy?
Right. So in Cully, I believe there's 15 miles of unimproved streets. So if it's $6 million per mile, right, there's not enough revenue to complete all of the streets. So That's why this approach says, if we look at this network here and then we sit down with PBOT and BES staff and say, where is there a Fix Our Routes project? Where is there a Safe Routes to School funded project? Where are we already making improvements with Safe Routes to School or with stormwater? And are there pieces that we can use these funds to actually connect, like make the connection and complete a
Right, well,
network?
let me just give you sort of a silly example here.
Sure.
So north of Killingsworth, you have a street that scores high,
Sure.
except for one block. So under this formula, isn't it possible that you're going to leave that one block there as an outlier?
It depends, you know, the reason that that might not be scored there is because that could be zoned as multi-use or multifamily and not residential, and that's why it wouldn't
Okay,
be
but
an
when you're
LTIC
doing
street.
construction, I'm no
Right.
great construction expert, so I could be totally out to lunch here, but it seems to me there's efficiencies and economies to doing the whole area
Right.
as opposed to picking and choosing and doing little bits and pieces here and there.
Right.
And I'm concerned that the strategy that you've laid out incentivizes little pieces here and there rather than a comprehensive strategy in an area. Am I wrong?
I think what we're proposing is that we would sit down to actually make sure that we would do exactly what you're saying, make sure that we would make a comprehensive investment, so that if that area was identified, the team would sit down and say, what's happening in that area?
Well, I mean, in terms of stretching our extremely limited resources,
Right.
isn't that the right strategy?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So
all
we
right.
can absolutely emphasize that we would make sure that we would make comprehensive, complete investments on segments.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks. That makes me
So
feel
I have
better.
2 questions.
Sure.
And on Thanksgiving morning, I actually drove the length of Northeast Killingsworth, and my son and I did a community service project, so I'm pretty familiar with this. What's interesting is a lot of the development is happening on Northeast Killingsworth. There's an elementary school on Northeast Killingsworth. And many of the organizations that we're putting a lot of resources into right now, whether they're Oak Leaf, right? The trailer park, Hacienda, Latino Network, and even the Habitat homes are in this stretch. And so I'm sorry if this is redundant, but are we making sure that as we look to take these unimproved streets, we're also creating safe routes where the kids are able to go from their homes to these various places? Because there's a community center at Hacienda, there's a school, and there's a number of other things. Are we making sure that there's safe routes that are also being contemplated? So it's not just the unimproved streets, it's a whole connected passageway from a home to a school or a community center?
Yes. I would say that because we are using, these priorities are based on safe route to school routes and pedestrian and greenways, that we are absolutely looking at where those connections are to make sure that those are the priority in terms of where we would make investments, so that we are creating those safe opportunities off of those main arterials into the neighborhoods where the schools are. So yes, and we can make a note to make sure that we prioritize that as well.
Well, and I'm guessing that PBOT wants to see this holistically
Yes.
too. We're going
Yeah.
to fix some of those unimproved streets, but also make sure there's a safe route for the kids to get
Kids
to the
get to school.
elementary school this way or Hacienda this way.
Sure, absolutely. Let's quickly move on to the Division Midway. I just wanted you to see all 3 of these. So again, this is just for 2018. So once we potentially made the investment in 2018, we would then go back to the drawing board when more funds were available to select another set of areas, which could be based on different sets of metrics and criteria. So as you can see in Division Midway, we have a larger area when it comes to equity. We have a more limited number of streets. But again, there's plenty of streets for the amount of money that we are potentially talking here to be able to make a meaningful investment. And
Can I
again,
ask a question
sure.
related to that? And again, maybe this is just rehashing the same question I asked earlier, but why not do more in a given area in one year and then move on to the next area the subsequent year and move on to the third area the third year?
In the third
I mean,
year?
people have waited 2.5 decades for this anyway. Why not be a little more comprehensive in a given area and spread it over 3 years?
Sure. So actually, back to what Commissioner Fritz was asking at the beginning about neighborhood feedback, because we heard loud and clear that people wanted this money to be spent geographically, we were trying to figure out how we could make meaningful investment where there had already been a lot of community involvement. These 3 plans were in 3 distinct areas of the city. They were focused on residential streets, and there was clearly need. We could bond $10 million and say, for the first 10 years, we're going to do Cully. And then the second 10 years, 10 years from now, we're going to do Division Midway. And in the third, we'll do Tryon-Stevens or some inverse. But that's sort of a 30-year investment. It was, again, it's been really...
But what I'm looking at is just the 2018 allocation.
Sure.
I mean, couldn't you just do 1 year in one area, Division Midway, and then the next year go to Cully, and the next year go somewhere else? I mean,
sure. The issue we have is that we could do it in that, I mean, if we're going to, it depends how much money we want to put towards this, right?
You're issuing the bonds up front, correct?
And we would identify the projects. So we could either identify $10 million worth of projects in these 3 areas, or I think what I'm hearing you say is we could focus on one area first.
Mayor, can I just add to that? Because the mayor is suggesting, just for us, for this conversation, what if we targeted a neighborhood? Because this is a BES-PBOT partnership, there is another potential benefit of doing that is not apparent from these slides, which is I lead the Bureau of Environmental Services. We have our own list of CIP projects, and we have our own list of other work we're doing. You know, when you look at Division Midway, this is going to end up being very disruptive. Lots of streets are going to be torn up. There's going to be impact on residential neighbors. Since one of the whole purposes here is linking up PBOT and BES to work more effectively so that we don't come in and disrupt the neighborhood and then the other bureau come in and disrupt it, and we do it together. To the mayor's point, if we were directed, if the council, and I'm not advocating, I'm just saying, if the council said take Cully and go deeper and do that first, then you could direct BES and water to come in and show us all the other lines where we're doing capital projects. And the neighborhood might have a slightly different view if we get it all done in a concentrated way rather than thinning the soup over time. It's just another consideration. I'm not advocating.
And I agree with that.
I'm not advocating.
I actually think there's some real logic to that, and making sure the pipes go in before the streets.
Right. Yes. Right. Yes, absolutely. And as I said, unfortunately, we don't have the BES maps.
If we are directed by council before the next hearing to do that, we could take these maps, do our overlay of the work we're doing, and then the council could just have that as a data point.
Absolutely.
Whether they want to go deeper in one place and
happy
potentially
to do that.
be less disruptive by coordinating the work.
Yes, and we'd be happy to do that. I want to show you finally just Tryon-Stevens, and then we can, I just wanted to be able to sort of give each of these areas. So again, I live in Southwest, so I was actually heartened to see that when you use the block level data, you actually do see meaningful, you see some areas here that do meet that our equity score.
Well, you didn't start with the equity score because it's not got the darkest equity area in there.
Probably, so again, it's communities of color, it was income and renter.
I know, so on your first slide that you showed, the area that scores a 3 on that is not in the Tryon-Stevens area. So that's not saying first look at equity.
Well, we said we would do this equity first, then we would lay the streets on top of it, the effectiveness, and then on top of that, we would lay these boundaries to see if within these boundaries, were there opportunities there? Because if we don't use the boundaries, then we're back to, there's still too many areas.
But that's using efficiency first, and then the effectiveness, and then the equity score. So that's not what you've proposed.
Right.
Actually, I have a suggestion, because I know I'm asking a lot of questions, and I have a lot more.
Sure.
And I know people are waiting to testify. We're already over the time allocated for this, so I personally am going to be quiet. I'd like to get to testimony when we can, and then discuss how to move forward.
Sure, absolutely. And I would just say quickly that when you look at that first map and you look at where all the equity, there's many more areas of equity than there are equity scores, than there are both money, and then we're back to doing disparate investment. So that's just what we struggled with. In any advice, support, direction that you can provide, we'd be happy to hear, because it was a hard, it's just hard because we just don't have as many resources. Okay.
Let me just comment on that before you move forward, because if you were to start with equity, there was only the one area in Southwest that has an equity score of 3. That also has the library, Jackson Middle School, Markham Elementary School, and 2 of the mosques in Portland. So that's scoring, and plus it's a much smaller area. So in response to the mayor's thing, you could actually do most of that. Now I have to declare that is my neighborhood. I no longer walk very much because I'm hardly ever there. But if you start with equity, which is what you say you are, you would get a different answer than if you actually start with efficiency and go backwards.
Commissioner Saltzman.
I'm just going to suggest that since clearly this is an issue that's going to take more time than we have budgeted today, that we complete the presentation, take the testimony, and then we continue the hearing to sometime in January or February.
Thank you.
And so the council will have more time to deliberate, and we'll have more time to think about the questions you've asked.
Absolutely.
And come back.
Great.
So we're going to quickly move on. This next piece won't take as long. The neighborhood streets framework. So I just talked about the blue. Quickly, I want to talk about the other 3 components. So grade and gravel, we have here another map. This map represents the 50 miles of dirt and gravel roads that are those LTIC streets. So dirt and gravel streets hinder the quality of local access, property values, and traffic management. At the neighborhood level, these streets are the weak links, the city's local street transportation and stormwater management networks. For our networks, this includes all modes of travel, particularly pedestrians. Good street connectivity, one of the foundation of the city's transportation policy, depends on public rights-of-way that both exist and are improved. While maintaining the 50 miles of dirt and gravel streets is not a long-term solution, ongoing maintenance requiring grade and gravel on an annual basis will improve local access, safety, and mobility. Staff is planning to develop a maintenance program for ongoing grade and gravel streets and include as a proposal in the development of the 2018-19 budget. The other thing we're going to do is complete a pilot project to validate the application of traffic calming elements and a permanent pedestrian facility while grading and applying gravel to a 10-block section of Southeast Cooper Street in the Brentwood-Darlington neighborhood. This Portland State University capstone project was developed for the Neighborhood Association with participation from neighborhood residents, PBOT, and BES. Moving to neighborhood collectors. Neighborhood collector streets lacking sidewalks are unsafe for pedestrians in many neighborhoods. Many neighborhood collectors are the backbones of our communities. When they don't have pedestrian treatments, they limit mobility and decrease safety. PED-PDX is Portland's citywide pedestrian plan that prioritizes sidewalk and crossing improvements. The plan does identify the key strategies and tools PBOT will use to make Portland a truly great walking city. An incomplete pedestrian network limits the city's ability to absorb growth and meet the livability and access needs of residents, including safe walking access to public transit and essential services. The 1998 pedestrian master plan has served inner Portland well, but has often struggled to provide adequate guidance for areas such as East Portland and Southwest Portland that present environmental challenges and right-of-way constraints. PBOT is committed to identifying a funding mechanism for neighborhood collector pedestrian enhancements upon council adoption of the PED-PDX plan projected to be completed in winter of 2018. And finally, to LIDs, residential LIDs. The project team did explore the potential for coordination between the LTIC program and efforts to organize local improvement districts to ensure maximum efficiency of public funds for unimproved local residential streets. The team examined 24,000 home sales in the city of Portland over a 2-year period. The study found that improving a dirt or gravel road increases property values by an average of $18,000 per home, and that improving an underimproved street to a fully improved street increases property values by an average of $4,100 per home. So the estimated average cost to improve a local street to the traditional standard is currently $30,000 per home. Thus, on average, the value to adjacent homeowners is less than the cost of making the street improvements, which is why we don't see very many LIDs. And when we talk about equity and which communities are the most organized to actually go out and do the LID, we see some barriers there that are worth us looking at to make these more accessible and affordable. So because of the cost of infrastructure improvements has been a barrier to the forming of residential LIDs, PBOT is going to explore financing deferral options for property owners, along with, where appropriate, utilizing the approved alternate street standards, and track the outcome of the proposed Arrow Heights LID that's in the Brentwood-Darlington neighborhood, because that proposal is currently looking at alternate street standards and financing. So now we're done.
Okay.
We're almost
You got
done.
any- oh,
Yep.
okay.
So I've just covered the 3 pieces of the presentation. We, of course, ask for your consideration, and I do understand that we're going to not look for approval right now, but to continue direction and invite direction from you as to how we should proceed. I just want to say that this concludes my presentation, and we do have PBOT staff Christine Leon, Rich Eisenhower, Kurt Kruger, Jody Yates, Denver Garda, BES staff Jonas Beery and Ivy Dunlap, along with Tiberius Solutions Principal Nick Popanek, just depending on what questions come up. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Before
thank
you guys, just have a comment, and that is that this issue has been a problem for 40 years or more, and this is moving the ball forward in a significant way. So thank you. I apologize for asking so many questions. I appreciate the discussion, and I think we're all ready to continue working on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's good work. Thank you. How many people do we have testifying?
15 signed up.
Oh, boy. Let's try and do it in 2 minutes.
Okay. First 3, please come on up, are David Martin, Claire Carter, and Rich Hanna.
Good morning. Would you like to start us off?
Good morning.
Thank you.
Sure. Left to right.
Thanks. And I know some people probably plan their testimony for 3 minutes, so I'm not going to be too hardcore about 2 minutes, but I just want to be cognizant of the number of people who have signed up. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Okay, my name is Claire Carter. I live at 6156 Southwest Nevada Court, Portland, Oregon. I submitted a letter of testimony, so my oral testimony will be somewhat different, but also quite short, so I hope that it will be the most efficient use of your time. I'm here to testify about the draft ordinance before you that proposes a methodology to allocate fees from the local transportation improvement charge, and also to further develop a new program for improving neighborhood streets. I sit on the Development Review Advisory Committee. I'm also a member of the Southwest in Motion Stakeholders Group, and have been following the PED-PDX group, which is the Portland Pedestrian Master Plan Update Group, as an observer. As I explained, I've submitted a letter of testimony that explains my perspective. Maybe I can answer a few questions if you have read that letter, but in a nutshell, when the initial proposal for the LTIC fees was presented to DRAC in 2016, the DRAC was in support of the program, since paying the fees was quicker and easier than requesting a sidewalk waiver or waivers of remonstrance, and had an assured outcome, and generated income for future improvements rather than letting developers pocket the costs of sidewalk construction and walk away. The last presentation to DRAC from PBOT about this program was at the November 16th meeting. At the November meeting, after the presentation, DRAC did not provide direction on either support or opposition to the proposed allocation methodology because it generally is kind of outside the scope of what that group works on, which is making the development process more efficient and quicker. However, I did raise the issue in the group that I think that it's poor public policy to take funds that are intended for sidewalks, pedestrian improvements, and roll them into a proposed full street auto-oriented program. When I raised this during the last DRAC meeting, 2 members of DRAC agreed, and they were probably the 2 members that had the most understanding of what policy would be, what policy issues would be. My letter and my testimony is to oppose the use of the LTIC funds in the Neighborhood Streets program. I support the use of the funds for pedestrian safety improvements. The amount collected from the funds are negligible in paying the costs of full street improvements and are best used for pedestrian safety and other improvements, which align most closely with 20 years of city planning to make Portland a walkable city. In addition, the allocation methodology, as I reviewed it, is flawed due to biases in the survey distribution and in the interpretation of how the strategy meets the 3 allocation goals of equity, effectiveness, and connectivity, and project readiness. And the overarching shortfall in this methodology is that the street improvement program really favors property owners and car owners over renters and carless households. And I think that is a big thing to think about when you look at the amount of these fees and what it could do for the pedestrian environment and how far they will go in actually improving streets in Portland to full city standards.
Very, very good. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is David Martin, and I chair the Sweeney Transportation Committee. And I do offer this testimony on behalf of Sweeney because of the fact the only points I intend to speak to are motions that have been passed both by the Sweeney Transportation Committee and the Sweeney Board. My involvement with LTIC goes back to 2015 when I sat in on what I believe the first meeting of the LTIC stakeholder working group. And for the past 3 years, PBOT has been repeatedly asking us, what do we want from LTIC? Well, the answer hasn't changed. We have very consistently said we want the funds to remain in the coalition area where they are generated. Southwest Portland has both the highest percentage of streets without curbs and the lowest percentage of streets with sidewalks. So on the infrastructure side, Sweeney finishes last. But on the funding side, we finished first because to date, 43% of the LTIC funds have been generated in the Sweeney Coalition District. Unfortunately, according to the current methodology, we have absolutely no assurances that those funds will remain within the coalition for the long term. So having some of the worst street infrastructure in the city while generating the most LTIC revenue to date, you can see why we put such a high value on keeping the funds within the coalition area. Personally, I have 2 children who are unable to walk or bike to schools because of this situation. That I find to be an equity issue. And the second answer to PBOT's question, what does Sweeney want, is we want to see the funds that are generated to be available to be used on adjacent streets. The whole point of the LTIC program was to shift funds from building sidewalks to nowhere to providing street improvements that neighborhoods wanted. And while instead, the Neighborhood Street program is focused on primarily addressing unimproved streets. And while that is a legitimate issue, neighborhoods find it bordering on the illogical to take the limited funds that we have generated and using it on the least used streets in a neighborhood. Our neighborhoods are the ones that are feeling the impact of the ongoing development, and we need the ability to direct the revenues to where they'll have the greatest impact, not the least. Unfortunately, what has been designed provides no assurances that and almost seems to guarantee that the improvements will have the least impact possible. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Rich Hanna. I'm recently a developer here in Portland, a residential developer, just 2 years into this. I was surprised in October by learn that I owe about $180,000 in LTIC fees, representing almost 10% of the overall collected citywide, if I were to pursue the project that I have purchased. My issue is slightly different from what's before you today, but I think it's still relevant. I've been encouraged to testify by a couple of folks that I've been talking to in the city. Very simply, I paid for and attended an EA meeting as part of a diligence activity that I was pursuing prior to the purchase. This EA meeting happened prior to the ordinance, the LTIC ordinance, being approved. It happened on, the ordinance was in April of 13. I'm sorry, it postdated the approval. So your ordinance was approved, LTIC, in April 13 of 2016. My EA meeting was April 26 of 2016. And the notes from that EA meeting were published on May 25th of 2016. In the subsequent 18 months or so that have passed since my EA meeting and the subsequent concept development meetings that I've attended with the city, right from the start, there's been total consistency. Sidewalks are not required for this particular development in Southwest Hills, but no mention of LTIC in any of the written or oral correspondence during that time. So in October of this year, when I submitted the alternative review form, I was notified that yes, in fact, sidewalks are not required, but you do need to pay LTIC. So my issue is really one that I'd like the city's guidance, which was really primary to the diligence that I did prior to acquiring this property, to be allowed to sort of carry the day on this particular matter. I have no issue with LTIC in general. I have no issue with paying LTIC or just paying for sidewalks if they're necessary. I have only an issue of making sure that the rules and the enforcement of those rules are communicated adequately at the time that one is doing diligence so that the overall project can be calculated properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Next three, please.
Are Chelsea Powers, Willie Dean, and Ken Paulson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please start.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Chelsea Powers, Brentwood Darlington Neighborhood Association Chair, and I just wanted to make sure that we were included in this project, and as I was looking at the three areas, I can see that once again we're left off the map. We are included in some pilot programs, which is great, but when you look at the criteria that was discussed regarding equity and need, our neighborhood was just as dark, gray, and just as orange as Southwest and Cully, but no little blue box. So part of that, I think, is the criteria of using transit as a factor. Our neighborhood is extremely underserved for transit, so that affects our score greatly. And I just want to highly support grading and graveling unimproved roads, because our neighborhood is home to over 5 miles of them that literally trap our neighbors in their homes in poor weather with potholes the size of a sedan. And I am not exaggerating, because most of the pictures in that presentation came from our neighborhood. So we need to make sure that Brentwood Darlington gets on the map. And I also support keeping the funds in the neighborhood coalitions, because as you see, both Southwest Coalition and the Southeast Uplift coalitions had the highest funds brought in from these fees, and that's where they should stay. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Willie Dean. I own property at 4233 Northeast Ainsworth Street, which is, and I'm building a house there, and I was recently given a check sheet that said that I owed LTIC fees of $23,700. I'd gone through a land use review previously where it said that improvements weren't going to be necessary. And my basic point is that through dealing with the situation that I'm in, that there's no way to appeal the LTIC or the parallel improvements. And at my property, I'd already gone through a process with PBOT where we decided that the improvements would be sort of misguided based on the strange frontage that exists in front of the property that I own. And so I'm here to recommend that there would be an appeal process for this if a person owns a piece of property that PBOT itself has said should not or could not receive the improvements. You know, in the check sheet, you get it either or, either pay LTIC or make the improvements. If those improvements aren't something that makes sense to do, then it doesn't seem equitable to require the person to still pay. Because if there isn't even a hypothetical situation where the improvement could happen in front of the property, then making somebody pay for the improvement doesn't seem fair. So I think there needs to be an appeals process put into this for, non-conforming pieces of property.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Ken Paulson, and Mayor Wheeler and City Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm requesting you reconsider or consider waiving the LTIC fee for environmentally sensitive lots where minimal disturbance and skinny streets have been encouraged. The one-size-fits-all philosophy is not appropriate for every circumstance, particularly in the case of a lightly used street such as our dead-end right-of-way, which can never extend more than 400 feet maximum. My son and daughter-in-law want to build a house on a lot we've owned for 25 years. At an early assistance meeting, they were told that they would have to pay a $90,000 fee because the 150-foot frontage to extend the substandard street, incidentally, more than half of that frontage is in the environmental protection zone. In other words, we can't use the land, but the fee still applies. In fact, it's odd that the P-zone restricts use of our property, but on the other hand, the P-zone doesn't restrict the fees that are levied for that same restricted area. The city's LTIC flyer describes the LTIC fee as fair, and I'd like to talk about fairness. Granted, we need to find a way to fund road improvements, but how can it be fair to single out a person to carry an unjust portion of the burden? We're told that we must pay for someone else's street and then also pay for our own street. How is this fair? The LTIC fee provides no improvement to the street we need. The funding problem for street improvement should be shared by all, not just a select minority. Now, granted, there's a proposal to limit the 90,000 feet to 60,000, but still it's unfair. It's like being told, it's like saying we're only raping a bunch instead of a lot. Any fee requires we fund a street for someone else, and we still must pay for our own street. Currently, we are anticipating city permit fees of more than $50,000 for a house, which includes thousands of dollars in system development charges already, including the transportation SDC. The LTIC fee proposed would more than double this to over $110,000 in city fees, and there are other fees too. Since we've owned this lot, average wages have slightly more than doubled, but permit fees have already risen by a factor of more than 30-fold. How is this possible? This proposal before you will not allow an appeal. I want to emphasize the point by my previous, my friend here. It subverts the process. And if we were, we would have no opportunity to appeal either the LTIC fee or the standard street improvements, which are impossible to meet. In other words, we're held hostage to pay the LTIC fee because it's impossible to meet.
Sir,
the full street.
Since your time is up, Mayor, can I just ask a question?
Certainly.
I was, first of all, on systems development charges, as you probably already know, if you moved to Hillsborough or a number of other places and built the house, you'd pay a lot more. Our systems development charges are actually lower than regional partners. The cost of the dirt is more, and that's, but thank God you own the dirt. But I'm very interested in what you said about E-zones and frontage. Now, E-zone is a zoning overlay which restricts your use of the land in order to protect it. And I can think of a lot of examples where we do that. We put easements on it. There's many instances where, through our zoning code or elsewhere, we put a restriction on the property for the broader public benefit. But your point is, if that's part of the frontage, you're being charged for that, for something that you can't get full use out of, and you find that inequitable?
I do.
Well, I don't know enough about this, the answer to the question, but we'll ask staff to follow up on that.
I
I'd be interested in
appreciate your attention to the matter. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. Next three people, please.
Are Fred Bueller, Garrett Stevenson, and David Ferris.
Good morning.
Morning.
Why don't you start us off, sir?
I'm Fred Buller. I own a corner lot. And so my fee, this is redundant from some of these other people, but I have 275 feet of lineal feet times 600 is 165,000. Add a building permit to that, you're 200,000 into the program before you even turn dirt. So I really agree to a certain extent with what the new proposal is. I think the way I understand it, I'm R7, so 7 times 600, I would pay approximately 40,000, so I would save 120,000. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning. My name's Garrett Stevenson. I'm an attorney with Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt. Here today representing Dr. David Ferris, who's going to speak briefly about his own experience with the LTIC. But I've also submitted a written testimony that you should have before you, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that. I'm going to do my best not to repeat any of the details I've got in the written testimony. But first, I want to say that we appreciate staff's willingness to suggest an LTIC cap, and we certainly support, in concept, a cap on the LTIC for a lot of the reasons you've already heard. What I want to do today is recommend that that cap be $30,000 for any single-family home, and I'm going to briefly explain why that is. In our view, the LTIC is subject to a takings analysis under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. And what this means is that the city has to first demonstrate that there's an essential nexus between the fee being charged and the government interest, but also that the city has made an individualized determination that the fee being charged is roughly proportional to the impact of that home on the infrastructure that it is affecting. In this case, when you're dealing with single-family homes, it would require that the fee has to be roughly proportional to the impact of a new single-family home on the street system. It's not clear to us how the LTIC in its current form satisfies either of these requirements. To the extent that the LTIC adjusts to the amount of frontage by being calculated on a per-foot lineal basis, we believe that that justification fails because there's no guarantee that the money paid will actually be used to construct a sidewalk on that frontage. All that being said, we believe that imposing a $30,000 blanket cap would go a long way to getting this program a lot closer to meeting these two requirements. And that's because each single family home in concept generates roughly the same impacts on the street system in terms of vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, and so on. The fact that the zoning in certain cases may be lower density does not, in our view, mean that there's going to be a reduction in trips that would justify or an increase in trips for that matter that would justify a higher fee. And I will note that I heard earlier staff say that the average per dwelling LID fee is about $30,000. So that's what we'd recommend. That concludes my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
And thank you. And for the record, we've also received your letter. Thank you for sending that.
Mayor.
Commissioner Fish.
And I appreciate that your memo cites to cases like Dolan, and that is raised every time someone is claiming the possibility of a taking in connection with any regulatory action we do. Do you have specific case law in Oregon that's on point?
Well, I mean, the game changer for Dolan, as you probably know.
I understand Dolan because people raise it, and
right.
home builders and others raise it repeatedly.
So, I mean, to my knowledge, this fee has not been challenged on a takings basis, to my knowledge. The case law that we cite in the letter cites a more recent case, which is Kuntz. I imagine you're familiar with it. And basically, it used to be under Dolan, look, if you're paying fees, that's not really a taking of private property. Well, Kuntz sort of changed that analysis. So, I mean, that's the primary governing case law that we were looking at. But really, our intent's not necessarily to threaten a takings action in this forum. Rather, it's just to explain why we believe that having a substantial reduction in that cap is appropriate.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing me. I'm David Ferris. I'm a physician in town. My wife and I own a single-family lot zoned R10 on Southwest Fairmont Boulevard. We purchased the lot in 2004 for $125,000 with the intention to build on it. The lot is right above Markham Hill Nature Park and is on extremely steep slopes, meaning that construction costs for a future home on the property will be relatively high. Under the LTIC regulations, I am obligated to either build a sidewalk or pay the fee if I want to develop the property. Our letter has the details, but with respect to your time, I'll try to be brief. The lot is so steep that there is simply no practical way for us or the city to construct a sidewalk, and to our knowledge, the city has no plans to do so. So someone wishing to build on our lot would have to pay the fee. Our LTIC fee would be $182,400, which is almost $60,000 more than we paid for the property. This would be in addition to SDC fees that would also be due for a new dwelling, which we estimate would be between $40,000 and $50,000. This means that the city fees for our house, for any house on our lot, would be in excess of $230,000. We want to sell our lot now, but not going to build on it, to someone who wants to build, but every potential buyer has walked away because of the amount of the LTIC. The LTIC has effectively rendered our property unmarketable and valueless. This is all the more troubling when it is clear that the LTIC paid on our lot would be used to construct sidewalks in other parts of the city. The LTIC needs to be reduced by orders of magnitude. At this rate, it kills any potential project on our lot, but in so doing also prevents the city from collecting any LTIC revenue from it. As Garrett explained, the LTIC must be reduced to a rate where it has some rough proportionality to the impacts. The city's proposal for our zone would cap this at $60,000. While this is a step in the right direction, we believe that the rate should be a maximum of $30,000 for all single-family homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming in. Next three, please.
Are Tim Lamers, Star Stoffer, and Paul Grove.
Good morning. Would you like to start?
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
My name is Tim Lamers. I'm a property owner in Southwest Portland. I'm facing an LTIC charge in excess of $120,000.
Could you move a little closer to the mic? So
Sure. Thank you.
You can pull it towards you.
I'll restate, I'm facing an LTIC fee of about $120,000 on a property that I wish to develop. This property also includes the restoration of a farmhouse on it. I'm also encouraging you to consider some rule changes that would allow appeals. I think it's unreasonable to have rules that cannot be discussed. Also, I do support the idea of some kind of cap that is relevant to the value of the property discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning, Star Stoffer. I have a few concerns about this project. One is it seems that none of these property owners are quite in understanding with how the LTIC fees are being applied to their properties, which means that there's a lack of transparency here. Not surprising, considering that according to their presentation, this really was just made public and available with, through public outreach since September. We just got out in November. That's not enough time going out to these neighborhoods, the coalitions, flyers, door to door, whatever it takes, to really get neighbors involved in what this actually means for their properties and their streets. And I understand that you may have consulted the PDC on how some of these improvements are going to be made and how those funds are going to be allocated. However, I'm with that person that testified before that they've got potholes the size of sedans. That's the same thing with North Portland. They're at the end of the road. Some of those neighborhoods don't even have sidewalks, and there are several people with disabilities living in those neighborhoods that don't even have access to the property that they own or the street that they live on because there's no sidewalk. And yet I didn't see that on the map. So one, how are these funds, who are these collectors? That's pretty vague. Who's doing the collection? How are these fees that are being assessed to these property owners, these long-standing residents of this community, actually being assessed? Who's doing the assessment? Why is there no appeal process? And why is everybody in so much confusion about this? Why did they have a whole slide up there with all these numbers? 131 people in a focus group? And they said something about a year and then said that they made it public since September. Those two things don't add up. 131 people? There are 650,000 people that live in Portland, and you asked 131 people. That's not enough. Not enough at all. There needs to be more time for the communities to get involved with this project, because clearly a lot of this is way too in the dark.
Thank you. Good morning.
Mayors, members of council, for the record, my name is Paul Grove with the Portland Metro Home Building Association. we testified previously at the rollout of the program, and frankly, we had members that served on the advisory committee, and we were supportive of the program and its rollout. And I think as we've seen through the presentation by PBOT and conversations with others, there certainly have been some unintended consequences that were realized by the program. And I know that this has been a long-standing issue for the city. So here today, and I will be brief, to talk about a couple of quick items. First, I think the cap is an important step in the right direction, and what that looks like, I think, is still subject to some potential discussion and refinement as we move forward. But I know that that is something that our membership had expressed concern about, and so I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. I think the reporting requirement that's outlined in there also stresses a degree of accountability that is important for membership as well in terms of how we're using the resources and where those will ultimately be deployed. A couple of items for consideration as we move forward, and I don't want to restate other people's points, but was as noted before in the PBOT presentation around alternative street standards. I think there's some opportunity for examination and refinement in terms of the proposal and what that looks like, how it would be applied and deployed, rather than having an either-or option. The second thing is potentially looking at a cap that is associated with the property value. There have been some outlier examples, and I know Commissioner Saltzman's office has been helpful in pointing folks in the right direction, but I think we should have some consistency and certainty in that process. And then the last thing is, I think it's in the spirit of partnership. Again, we were committed partners to this in the beginning. We'll be partners moving forward. I think there's opportunity to convene folks from the original working group or DRAC to employ them and get their feedback and input on the proposal to help refine it moving forward. So thank you.
Well, I have one question, if I could, while you're here. From your point of view and from the point of view of your organization, does a reasonable cap on any single-family property resolve any of your questions or concerns about nexus or proportionality under the applicable case law?
Well, Commissioner Fish, I appreciate the question. I think a cap is an important step. As I noted, I'm not a legal expert to talk about the applicable case law here today with you. I'm happy to maybe poll some of our members, talk with them, and go from there. But at this moment
you haven't,
in time,
but just to be fair, you have not raised a legal challenge to the LTIC under either proportionality or nexus, and you have been at the table working out the details. So can we assume that you're satisfied that with reasonable cap and other protections, this is otherwise constitutional?
I am not in a position to speak to the constitutionality of an issue, but we did not raise that issue during the work of the work group.
And are you planning to raise it at some future time?
It has not been discussed amongst our membership.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks to all three of you. Appreciate it. Next three, please.
The last two who signed up are Rick Bartko and Laura Young.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming in.
Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, my name's Rick Bartko. I live in Mill Park neighborhood. I'm here representing myself as a citizen, but more importantly, Division Midway Alliance, which is basically centered on the Boulevard division in the neighborhood of 112 to 148. So we have a vested interest in getting some clarity on the proposals that PBOT has made about our neighborhood. Division Midway Alliance is a neighborhood prosperity initiative, and we are the people that will be advocating for equity, hopefully most aggressively in this session. We had a neighborhood street plan put together by PBOT with the expert help of April Bertelson a couple of years ago, called the Division Midway Neighborhood Street Plan. And I would just ask for clarity on which portions of that street plan. And I couldn't see the specific map that was shown, hadn't seen it before, but if we get some clarity from PBOT as to what areas, what geographic areas of East Portland are involved within the context of the street plan. I have a specific example of developments going on right next to me. One property being developed, one property potentially to be developed. Those two properties in aggregate, one single family residential, smaller lot, and a larger lot are going to be about $150,000 under the existing LTIC. So I would like some clarity also with PBOT on what issues may happen on that street segment. And I would just ask for basically collaboration between PBOT, BES, BPS, and all the folks involved to make sure that the things we talked about, coordinating projects, goes on in a timely and effective fashion. And that's all I have.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. So it's a little serendipitous that this gentleman and I sat down together. I'm from Cully. I'm Laura Young. I am the Cully Association of Neighbors Chair. I'm also the district manager of the Cully Boulevard Alliance, which is a neighborhood prosperity initiative. We also in Cully have a neighborhood streets plan that was put together by Debbie Bischoff. It's the Cully Main Street Local Street Improvements Plan. And we, back in 2012, participated in the Out of the Mud and Dust initiative and enthusiastically supported that. Unfortunately, since 2012, not a single alternative street has been built in Cully. There's a number of issues. I'm actually really pleased to hear, after hearing all this testimony, that this will be coming back in January to give more time for folks to iron out some of the details. So just briefly, you have my comments there, but I'm very much in favor of a cap and an appeals process for folks so that all of these property owners that are here today are really able to stand behind this program and feel that it's equitable and not feel that it's being creating a burden to them to the extent that they're not able to even develop a property. The 3 neighborhoods that were identified in this plan all have local street improvement plans in place, and that's why they were identified. It's not to say that there aren't other neighborhoods just as much in need, particularly Brentwood, Darlington. I would say, however, that of the annexed neighborhoods that have dirt and gravel roads that have been annexed since 1985, not a single one has received a funded street improvement or graveling or regrading or maintenance of a gravel road in those 32 years. And I can personally tell you that there are 35-foot trees in the middle of 70th Avenue, 2 blocks from my home. So there needs to be some sort of systematic and equitable method of addressing these issues. And grading and graveling of all of the neighborhood streets seems to be a step in the right direction.
Laura, can I just pose a question, since
Sure.
we're going to have more time to think about this? The mayor, I think, put a provocative question on the table, and you're uniquely qualified to think about it and give us some feedback, which is, if in this process Cully was one of the communities singled out and prioritized, but the city came back and said, if we delay a year or two, we can go deeper and bigger by bringing utilities and others to bear, and therefore attempt to minimize the cumulative impact of all this work. Is that trade-off worth slightly delaying the work? And I'm not expecting you to give an answer now, but I think it's a provocative question we need to ask, because it is very disruptive when we go into these communities and do this work. And if we coordinated it differently and gave you the promise of a bigger impact, would you be willing to trade off a little delay for that? And is that a fair trade-off?
Well, I think that is a pretty provocative question. My personal opinion is that we want to create the greatest amount of efficiency possible, get the most bang for our buck. But I would defer to my neighborhood and invite you all to come and talk about it with them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that completes the testimony. As I said a few minutes ago, we will take everything under advisement and come back either in January or February for hopefully a revised proposal that addresses many of the concerns that have been raised today. Thank you all.
Very good. Thanks, Commissioner Saltzman. Thank you to everybody who testified today. Next, item 1283.
Approve funding recommendations made by Children's Levy Allocation Committee for November 1, 2017 through June 30, 2019.
Commissioner Saltzman.
Thanks again, Mayor. And we're pleased today to highlight a few early childhood programs that will serve additional children and families throughout the city of Portland with new support from the Portland Children's Levy. Since 2002, the Portland Children's Levy has strengthened our community by helping thousands of children from birth through college reach their potential. And we've done this through increasing children's access to proven programs that provide positive early development, school engagement and academic achievement, high school graduation assistance, and family safety and stability services. So today we have Portland Children's Levy Assistant Director, Meg McElroy, here to ask Council to approve new 2-year investments in early childhood programs made by the Levy's Allocation Committee. The Allocation Committee, just to remind everybody, consists of a city elected, a county elected, a citizen representing the county, a citizen representing the city, and the Portland Business Alliance appointee. So this is a $1.6 million additional investment to provide additional child care availability for working families, quality support for in-home child care providers, and 2 new early Head Start classrooms and training for community education workers. I'll turn it over now to Meg McElroy.
All right, sounds great. Thank you, Commissioner Saltzman. And thank you, Council, for having us today. I'm going to run through a rather brief and quick overview at how we arrived at these funding recommendations, how the Allocation Committee arrived at these funding recommendations, and then we have some guests who would like to testify with you on behalf of the projects that are being considered for funding. So as Commissioner Saltzman said, funding decisions are made by a 5-member oversight committee for the Portland Children's Levy, which is part of what is required in the authorizing language that goes to voters for the Portland Children's Levy. And the 5 members of that committee include Commissioner Dan Saltzman, Chair Kafoury of the Multnomah County Commission, Julie Young, who is a city-appointed representative, Serena Stademeyer Wesley, who's a county-appointed representative, and Mitch Horniker, who's a representative of the Portland Business Alliance. Voters have approved the Portland Children's Levy beginning in 2002. It's a 5-year local option levy that has been renewed twice, most recently in May of 2003. 95% of all revenue goes directly to fund proven programs in our community. Through the ballot language that authorizes the levy, only 5% of the revenue can be spent on administration.
Hold for 1 sec.
Yes.
Mayor, I just want to note we're an hour behind. This is scheduled for 30 minutes. Given the number of people who are going to testify, I'm guessing we'll go over that. And we have a full afternoon. So I just need to coordinate something I have scheduled over lunch. Do you intend? What's your pleasure? We will go until when?
So.
Haven't actually reached our regular agenda yet.
Yeah, my suspicion is we'll lose our quorum in an hour and 10 minutes. And the only space that I see looking at our weekly schedule, which is crammed, is either meeting early on Thursday at 1 p.m. or extending beyond our current Thursday time certain item from 4 to 5. Those are the 2 options that seem to make the most sense looking forward.
So we'll be losing our quorum in about an hour and 10?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so we'll plan around that. And is it your initial instinct to start an hour early tomorrow?
If we could do so, I'd like to do that, but I haven't pulled the various commissioners' offices.
Thank you.
There's actually the Human Rights Commission Awards from noon to 1 out at Urco. So I wouldn't be able to be here by 1.
Okay, well, it sounds like 4 to 5 is, assuming our hearing doesn't take more than 2 hours, and I wouldn't anticipate that it does. Then I would request that we extend till 5 p.m. Yeah, if
Okay,
that's
so we'll
all
start
right.
working on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Excuse the interruption.
Sorry.
No problem. I understand. On that note, I'll try to make my comments brief because I think the most compelling thing that you'll hear today is from the people who have taken the time to come down and speak on behalf of the programs being considered for funding. So the levy is audited annually. All audits are available on our website, www.portlandchildrenslevy.org. The Allocation Committee adopted in this levy period 3 goals that inform its investments based on an extensive public input process, examination of local data on children's needs, and a view of national research and best practices. Levy goals include preparing children for school, supporting their success inside and outside of school, and reducing racial and ethnic disparities in children's well-being and school success. The levy makes its funding recommendations based on revenue projections from the City Economist on an annual basis and invests in multi-year grants through a competitive process. During this 5-year levy period, we have experienced higher than projected revenues for each year, the first 3 years of this 5-year levy, and it is those funds that are being considered for investment today. The Allocation Committee has looked at several policy objectives in order to make decisions about how to invest the additional revenue that exceeded city economist projections, mainly looking at expanding existing grants to serve more children with the good work that's happening in those programs, and doing some new grant making, although minimizing that because of the impact on administration of running additional competitive grant processes. Most recently, new grants were made to additional after-school programs, and you all approved that sometime this summer. Prioritizing effective programs that are performing well with current levy funding. And then finally, most recently, with these additional funds, the Allocation Committee considered the state funding situation in this upcoming biennium, or this recent biennium, as it would impact levy-funded services, particularly in early childhood. So the recommendations that are before you today include all of these recommendations include funding that would begin November 1 through the end of the current 5-year levy period, which is June 30 of 2019. It is, the first 3 on this list are an expansion of services already being funded by the levy. So the first one is a $1.1 million expansion to the Community Child Care Initiative, which is operated by Child Care Resource and Referral of Multnomah County, which is a program based at Mount Hood Community College. It provides additional children and families with access to affordable, high-quality child care in Portland. It also provides some support for in-home child care providers to increase their quality and involvement in the state's child care quality effort, the SPARK program. The next 2 investments are for each of the local Head Start and early Head Start providers, Albina and Mount Hood Community College, additional investments to allow 1 more early Head Start classroom with each provider. Those would each serve 8 additional children each year for the remainder of the funding period. And then finally, a workforce training investment to replicate some of the training work that's happened with a new program, the Community Education Worker Program, which is based on the community health worker model, but focuses specifically on early learning and development with children and families, and to create a pilot training opportunity for more early childhood workforce professionals to experience the type of training opportunity that these individuals have had, with a specific focus on culturally specific communities and building capacity within those communities to do more advocacy and services for their own communities based on their own identified needs.
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. Is this per year, or is this for the 5 years?
It's neither. It's from November 1st of this year through the end of the current levy, which is June 30, 2019. So we're in year 4 of the current levy.
Thank you for reminding me. I was just doing the math between the 250 and the 8 children and getting a bit worried, but that's...
Yes, understood. Yeah, those are, I should just clarify, early Head Start services are a full day child care service with meeting all of the federal Head Start performance standards. So it operates as a full day child care for infants and toddlers for families with incomes at the federal poverty level.
Good program, thank you.
You're welcome. And so unless you all have questions, I would prefer to turn it over to the folks who've come today in the interest of both your time and your agenda and also theirs.
That sounds good. Thanks, Meg.
Yep.
So now we will hear from some of the recipients of this new funding. We have some providers and a parent from the Community Child Care Initiative and a few community education workers who obtained the Community Education Worker certification. So to start off, I'd like to invite the Community Child Care Initiative providers, Shannon Naden and Karen Messner, along with parent Lydia Ramirez. I hope I pronounced that correctly. If you could please come up, and thank you for your patience today.
No, thank you.
And welcome.
Hi.
Who wants to start?
Come on. Okay. You'd like me to? Yeah. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Shannon Naden, and I run a family child care program in Southeast Portland. I've been a child care provider for 30 years. I am a 5-star Spark care provider and work with the ERDC and the CCIP program. So just a few statistics to let you know what my program has done since the year that I've been involved with CCIP. We have 19 children in care, and of those 19 children, there's 15 families we care for, and 12 of those children, excuse me, receive subsidies from CCIP and ERDC. So in Southeast Portland, we're a very low-income family child care program and definitely servicing the needs of the community. So my first point is that how CCIP has stabilized these families. Since the extra cost of coverage, we've had no drop in care this year. So 15 families in care have stayed in care, providing consistency of care and continuity of care for those families and children. We've added toddler spots to our program because they've been able to meet the difference between the actual cost of care and what ERDC covers. So we have 2 toddlers in our program now that would not have been there before. We've also stabilized our staff. We've had no staff retention because we've been able to stabilize the care and we've had the extra income. We've applied 2 new staffs to our program. So we actually run a 1-to-5 ratio, which is above the state standard and meets close to our national standard, which we're really proud of. And because of that, we've also increased our payroll increase. So our staffing's between $12.50 an hour and $18.50 an hour. So overall, some really great improvements.
Sounds like it. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
You said you're a 5-star Spark. That sounds really impressive. What is it?
So it's the QRS Quality Rating Improvement Program that started, 4 years ago. I'm an advocate for high-quality child care, and I've pretty much, I like to say I'm a trailblazer. So I was one of the first providers in Southeast Portland to receive, or in Portland to receive their 5-star. It means I meet a very high standard of quality. My portfolio is a stack about that high. I've documented and basically follow a very high ethic of standard, a national standard, and it exceeds our state standards for child care.
And what entity is it that goes through all that and decides that you are a 5-star Spark?
About a year's worth of putting together a portfolio, improving my...
Who is it that says
you
are?
Who is it?
Yeah.
Well, Portland State has the money right now, or not, I'm sorry, not Portland State, but Western Oregon is overseeing this project. I couldn't give you all the specifics about...
Apply to Western Oregon to get your 5-star rating.
Absolutely. I worked with the Mount Hood Child Care Resource and Referral. Again, put all my documents into a portfolio, sent it off, got approved, had it looked at, had a class evaluation. It took about a year to get that classification and to prove our competency.
Well, thank you for your work. I mean, $12 an hour to 18 is better than it has been before, but it's still not a lot of work, a lot of pay for what you do.
Yes.
So thank you to all of your workers.
I just wanted to say I'm a big supporter of the minimum wage going up, and I think in childcare it's going to make a huge difference. And programs like this really make a big impact on what we can do and keep those staff and provide that quality.
Thank you. Would you like to go next?
My name is Lydia Ramirez. I'm a parent of CCI. I currently have 3 children enrolled in the program, an 11-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 9-month-old. I have recently been accepted onto the program because of the changes that allowed self-employed parents onto the program. Before I got any subsidy help from these resources, I did not have stable daycare. Being self-employed, my hours are absolutely, I don't have a regular schedule. I'm there from opening to close, day in and day out, and now having suitable daycare and not having to worry too much about carrying such a heavy financial burden going towards daycare, I am able to work. I am able to provide. I am a little nervous for when the programs are gonna end because then I'll be picking up that other costs that right now are being gifted to me. So I am truly grateful for this because I will be successful in my business. Karen over here is my daycare provider. I've actually been able to work with her off and on for about 10 years. And this is the most consistent that I've been able to keep my kids in there. I've been able to watch her program grow. She's a Spanish immersion, has hired now 2 certified daycare providers, teachers, one for each of her homes. And it's amazing to see the development in my younger children, just with what she's been able to help with when I'm not there, when I'm at work, trying to make ends meet for my family. So Karen could tell you a little bit more about how it's benefited her business.
Excuse me, I apologize for being late, but did you just say that there's Spanish immersion in the childcare program?
It is a Spanish immersion daycare, yes.
In daycare?
The entire daycare is, yes.
Both of my kids went through Spanish immersion through high school. I mean, one is about to go into high school, but it's a wonderful program to get in early. And then the other little secret is the kids in Spanish immersion pick up other languages so much easier.
I wish it was available for every child, because I think that if you teach a second language at an early age, they are able to learn a whole lot more, and even excel in our English language, just having all these different
Congratulations.
exposures.
The cultural enrichment. And then my son, who's in 8th grade, said that it's now a snap to pick up French because there's so many similarities.
Exactly, yeah. A lot of the languages are similar. Unfortunately for my children, we didn't even get into Spanish immersion to continue. So I'm really, really hoping that my 9-month-old, who has been with Karen since 6 weeks old, will be able to get into a Spanish immersion, because technically she would be considered bilingual because they only speak Spanish at her daycare. So nice. I'm hoping that she can get in because my other 2 didn't.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Messner. I've been doing childcare for 13 years, and I have 2 certificate childcares, homes in home childcare, and this program has been helping a lot. We just been available to hire like 2 head teachers, like Lydia said, for each house, more staff. And you know, I can see the difference. Now we have more stable kids in the daycare. They are coming, you know, in a regular basis. Like before, when the parents can afford the whole daycare, they have to be jumping kids around with the family members to be available just to afford some of the daycare. And you know, this program is a really good program. It's a really nice. It's helping a lot of the families. We have around 39 kids on our programs on both houses. And, you know, all the families, they can see the difference now with the head teachers. We also are participating on the Spark program. For the Spanish network, we are the first one to send the portfolios. And we get approved. We get in 3 stars. We start with 3 stars. And we're just working on the education to go to 5-star, who is the high quality. But for us, for the Spanish speakers, we just started a program with the Sparks, and it's a really nice. And you will making a lot of improvement on our daycare, and with the families we have and all the kids.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
And then we have, and finally, we have a few of our community education worker group. And I guess I don't have their names, but they can give us their names. Oh, I do have their names. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning. Good morning.
Tamika Branham Phillips.
Yes, sir.
Laura Peraza, Winter Rose, and Amy Amir. Did I get that right? Close?
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
go ahead, please.
Thank you and good morning, Commissioner Salzman, Mayor Wheeler, and City Council. My name is Tamika Branham Phillips, and I'm a certified community health and education worker, family advocate with the Urban League of Portland. I work mainly with African American families and others with children ranging from ages 0 to 6 years of age. What I have learned the most about the community education worker training is how to really meet families where they are at using my own life experience, popular education, and decolonization models. This was a new concept for me, and it looked very different from my 20 years experience through traditional education, the military, and a former healthcare career. One of my many hats I wear in this role is providing home visits and parent classes using the popular education and decolonization model. Popular education can best be described as the people's education, community education, or street smarts. It is the knowledge that is passed down and is presented in many forms. We see it as music, stories, dances, traditions, and experiences are just a few examples of what popular education looks like. Decolonization allows people of color a way to view ourselves through our own lens, rather than the way we are viewed, taught, or organized by people outside our community experience who have power or privilege. Getting parents involved in the Community Education Worker Certificate Program will benefit the children, our schools, and our families within their homes. When parents are in the school, they bring home the school's expectations and culture. School work assignments are better understood. This will help both children and parents improve their literacy and numeracy skills. Younger children are exposed to early educational norms and have a higher chance of preschool and kindergarten readiness. Older children feel more connected to their parents, and I believe school issues such as bullying and educational challenges would be better understood and better problem solved. Since the culture of children are brought to the schools through their parents, disruptive behaviors resulting from cultural and communication misunderstandings would be decreased, helping our children stay in the classroom and out of disciplinary actions or special education classrooms that they may not need. The ripple effect with when parents are given opportunity to have a career path in schools is significant. When members of our community see parents getting involved in the school system and getting a career path, word will spread. Others will get curious and want to be involved. Children will talk and share their experiences as well. Kids, parents, and the community members alike will look to more career paths in education. The excitement of being a teacher as a career path will be restored in our culture.
Thank you. Go next.
Good morning, Chamber. My name is Winter Rose, and I'm here to talk a little bit about our trainings. When talking about the CEW trainings, I can speak from my own personal experience working with the Native American community, which in itself has faced a high level of systemic intergenerational trauma. And being a service provider that has participated in numerous other trainings in my career, I can briefly touch upon what sets our trainings apart. In these trainings, when presented, they're facilitated in a way that really speaks to the participants and a lot of times can help participants really truly find their voice. The model in which information is presented not only empowers participants, but places a very strong value on people's lived experiences and the way people have or can overcome adversity. Our trainings not only inform us on important information and topics, but it gives us multiple direct and different relatable ways to convey this information to the communities in which we serve. The different approaches and strategies that we are taught in these trainings are very different than the classic Western style of delivering information, and they're all culturally responsive. We are also able to tailor these ways of conveying information specifically to the different communities in which we serve. I personally have been given many tools from these trainings that help me unpack some of the trauma that my community has faced and a lot of times continue to face in their daily lives. These different approaches allows participants to come up with out-of-the-box ways to convey information to different communities and really work with those communities in a way that can help those communities feel truly heard, which otherwise they may not have. It's important when moving forward with trauma and working with communities, helping them heal, that we come from a place ready to meet them where they are and really center our interactions with them in a place that not only empowers these communities, but they're truly tailored to meet the needs of different communities. And I really feel like CEW trainings do just that.
Thank you, Ms. Rose.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioner Suslins. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with your name. My name is Aini Amir. I'm currently working at ERCO Africa House as a community education worker. Before this role, I used to work as a community education worker. I worked with 30 family newly arrived African parents to support and teach them about their children, growth, and brain development. In 2016, I was trained as a community education worker, and I thought this training, I was exposed to new skills, knowledge, and resources that of a greater benefit of the needs population. The program empowered me to have a better understanding of how to guide newly arrived family with their children, lead and live a better lives. The CEW program exposed me to a culturally specific model that relates to, connects our families, our African families to resource here in Portland and the state of Oregon. A case in point is me working with a child with autism and delayed speech development before the CEW training. I focused on the child brain development and well-being, but after the CEW training, I realized the mother was highly stressed and did not spend much time to talk with her child. When I focused and connect her to community resources and the child's speech, speech improved greatly, and both mother and child are very happy now, and this gives me a joy and professional satisfaction as a CEW.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Just have two more people. Welcome. If you could just each give us your name and.
Okay. Buenos días, señor alcalde. Buenos días, señores comisionados. Okay. Mi nombre es Laura Peraza y yo soy una promotora de educación del aprendizaje temprano.
This is Laura, and she works at Latino Network. She's a community education worker, and she works with early childhood, and I'm Melissa McCoy. I'll be interpreting on her behalf.
Okay. Estoy aquí para hablarles acerca de todos los entrenamientos que he recibido y uno de los
I'm here to talk to you
entrenamientos.
today about all of the trainings that I have had.
Uno de los entrenamientos que me ha impactado muchísimo y que también ha sido de una herramienta muy beneficiable para las familias.
One of the trainings recently that I've had that has had the most impact and the greatest impact is
Navegando en el sistema escolar.
navigating the school systems.
Para nuestra cultura hispana es algo que no es muy común.
For our Latino community, this is not something that's very common.
Nosotros tenemos la idea de que eso empieza cuando los niños entran en la escuela.
We have the idea that this is something that begins once our children enter the school system.
Y que eso lo hacen los maestros, los directores, las instituciones.
And that this is something that the teachers, the principals, the institutions themselves do.
Tienen la obligación de hacerlo.
They have the obligation to do that.
Pero en este país nos hemos mirado que necesitamos involucrarnos en la educación de nuestros hijos.
But here in this country, we've seen that it's different and that we as parents need to be more present in our children's education.
Pero nos damos cuenta de que tenemos muchas barreras y pensamos, ¿cómo lo voy a hacer si yo no hablo inglés?
But we've noticed that we've encountered many barriers, one of them not being English. So how are we going to work with this system?
Y muchos de nosotros nunca hemos estado en una escuela.
And many of us have not been in schools.
Entonces, ¿cómo lo voy a hacer? Entonces, en este entrenamiento nos han enseñado que son los padres los que conforman el PTA.
So with this training, we've noticed that it's important to let the parents know about the PTA and how to be involved.
Y que los padres tenemos el derecho y la obligación de ser voluntarios en la escuela de nuestros hijos.
And as parents, we have the right and the obligation to be involved in our children's life and education.
Y que trabajando en conjunto con las escuelas podemos llevar a nuestros hijos al éxito académico.
And working together with the school, we can also provide academic excellence for our students.
Y en este trabajo que estoy haciendo, creando liderazgo hacia los padres de que se involucren en la educación de sus hijos, nos damos cuenta de los grandes cambios que estamos haciendo en la comunidad.
And through this work, teaching parents to be advocates and having them work with their students in their school to therefore make a change in the school.
Y nos damos cuenta de que nuestros hijos ya se están graduando.
And we've noticed now that our children, our kids are now graduating.
Cosa que antes, en el pasado, hasta hace como 3 años, en mi vecindario, los niños iban dejando las escuelas a muy temprana edad.
Things that she's noticed within her own neighborhood school, even 3 years ago, where students were not graduating and leaving school at an earlier rate.
Entonces es por eso la gran importancia de este entrenamiento, porque de esta manera estamos enseñando a los padres, no, yo puedo llegar en la escuela, pedir un salón de clases para platicar con mi comunidad.
So that's why this work for parent advocates is so important, so that they recognize that they can go to the school and ask for a room and have a space to meet with other parents and talk.
¿Puedo pedir un intérprete?
I can ask for an interpreter.
Ajá, y que también puedo pedir una cita con el director.
And I can ask for a meeting with the principal as well.
Y que el director tiene la obligación de escucharme.
And that the principal has an obligation to listen to me.
Y puedo ir al distrito escolar a abogar por la escuela de mis hijos.
And I can go to the school district and advocate for my child's school.
Y que también la mesa directiva de los distritos son padres.
And also that the board of each school district are parents.
Y que cualquiera de nosotros podemos llegar a formar parte de esa mesa directiva.
And that anyone can become part of that, the board of the school district.
Y si no soy escuchada en el distrito, puedo llegar en el Capitolio y expresar lo que quiero, lo que necesito o lo que mis hijos necesitan tener.
And if I'm not heard at the school district board, then I know I can go to the Capitol and speak for the needs, wants of my child.
Y ya lo estamos haciendo porque nuestras familias ya están tomando ese liderazgo fuerte para abogar a nuestros hijos. Y creo que ya lo estamos viendo en las instituciones.
And that's what they're currently doing, is taking parents to the state to be able to advocate for the good of their children.
Muchísimas gracias por escucharme y feliz día.
Thank you for listening to me, and have a great day.
Thank you both.
A quick question. Which school district are you in?
Estamos en Portland Public School.
Great, good to hear that.
Estamos en Reynolds.
Reynolds.
Oh, Reynolds, right.
Ajá. Y estamos en David Douglas.
So all three, that's really interesting.
Sí,
yeah.
ajá, sí.
You do my heart good as being the old parent activist. I remember when I had similar trainings when my firstborn started kindergarten. I'm so happy that you're participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that completes our testimony, and ready for a vote. Oh, I guess
we should probably let, is there any public testimony, Carla, on this
No one
item?
else signed up.
Very good. I call the roll.
Fritz.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Saltzman, for your continued leadership on this, and everybody who was here today. Certainly the personal stories make it real and help us to understand why this program is so important. And with all the worries coming down from the federal government, it's good to know that Portland has voted to tax ourselves to make these kinds of services available. And when people say, well, you know, the government wastes our property taxes, actually look at what's being done in this program, and it's an investment in this generation as well as the next generation. So thank you for your leadership on it. Thank you to Portland's taxpayers for supporting this, and I hope we'll continue to do it and expand it in the future. Aye.
Fish.
Thank you, Commissioner Saltzman, and thanks to our honored guests for sharing their testimonials today. Aye.
Saltzman.
Well, I want to thank our guests for being here, and thank you for your patience. And this is, you've demonstrated to us that this is money that's well invested in helping children to be safe and successful, and to help you to be good parents and to work with good parents who are doing their best to raise their families. So thank you all for the work you do. Aye.
Wheeler.
Well, we heard impressive testimony today that really gets at the human side, the human equation of the work that's done in this fund. And I also just want to point out, as having long ago served on the distribution committee as the then Multnomah County chair, there are lots of discussions about making sure that we're prioritizing the right things, that we're investing the funds wisely, that we're keeping the administration under the 5% cap, as Commissioner Saltzman identified early on. And over the years, I've watched and have been impressed with how this program has expanded responsibly and continues to be responsive to the highest needs in the community. And so I thank you, Commissioner Saltzman, for keeping this on track year after year, and I thank everybody who came in and testified. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Now, colleagues, I'm going to do a little bit of skipping around here, so bear with me. I've had some requests here, and I want to take advantage of the fact that we have certain people in the room. I'd like to start with item 1302, please.
1302, reappoint Kelly Sweeney, Laura Young, and Ron Schmidt to the Citizen Noise Advisory Committee for terms to expire October 2020.
Colleagues, the CNAC was organized in 1998 as an official part of the Port of Portland Advisory Committee on Aircraft Noise Issues. Local jurisdictions in the Port of Portland appoint a 15-member committee of community members to represent residential and business concerns. Members develop ideas, recommend proposals, and partner with other committees to promote citizen understanding of airport noise issues. To tell us a little bit more about CNAC, I hope I'm saying that right. Do you guys call it CNAC? That's what I thought. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't making that up. And the appointees today we have with us from the Port of Portland, Phil Stenstrom and Jerry Gerspach. We also have with us today our three reappointees, Kelly Sweeney, Laura Young, and Ron Schmidt. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I don't know if my fellow commissioners have any questions or if there's anything you'd like to say about your time.
My only question is, Laura, how many hats do you actually wear?
Many.
I think
Many.
you're going to set a record.
It's just my day, Council.
Well, needless to say, thank you for all the service you give us in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you all for coming in, for being interested in serving on this committee, and particularly understanding that all of you know what you're getting into as reappointments. This is a very important committee, and we hear noise issues not only through our own noise control office, but we also hear it directly from the folks who live in close proximity to the airport in particular, but elsewhere. And it serves a very important livability function in our community, and by extension, a public health function as well. So thank you for your service. I don't know if there's 30 seconds you want to add to the record.
Mayor, my name's Ron Schmidt. I live on the only inhabited island in the entire city of Portland, which is right up there. It's Hayden Island.
That's right.
Just yesterday, I had a business conversation in my floating home that was disrupted by aircraft noise. I moved here in 1987. Like most people in North Portland, we were aware of what we were moving into. But we have three people here who I think have good balance. We know that there are issues in the city of Portland. There's infrastructure that no one wants in their backyard, whether it be airports or our sewage system in North Portland or whatever it might be. But I've been impressed by my colleagues with the balance that they've taken, working with the Port of Portland, with the Oregon Air National Guard, and the fact that we do live in the area, we do believe in our city, and we do believe in commerce. I think we'll represent the citizens well and give a balance into the future. So we appreciate the reaffirmation.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
If I could add one more point, Kelly Sweeney, 1,000 yards south of the airport's tower in the Beaumont-Wilshire neighborhood. All three of us represent impacted noise areas, and that's why I think we're all wanting to reaffirm or get you guys to reaffirm our status, because we're indebted to our neighbors to help get the noise vacuum out to the public and vice versa back into the Port of Portland.
Thanks, and thanks for your interest in serving.
Mayor, I move the report.
Did you have anything to add, Laura?
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Thank you not only for serving, it's a very important committee, but also for being here today. Aye.
Fish.
Thank you very much for your service. Each of you is engaged in so many other endeavors, and so to have that expertise on this body is important. I used to live in the Grant Park, Beaumont, Wilshire neighborhoods, so the airplane noise was, particularly at night, when they did certain routes, it was very noticeable. It's interesting, I now rent an apartment in Goose Hollow, and I'm woken up every morning around 5 o'clock by the trains that run through the Central East Side blasting their horns, and the sound echoes actually off my building, which is Vista St. Clair, which is interesting. And since I happen to face south and east, I get woken up every morning at 5 o'clock And I'm not entirely sure why they have to blast the horn so robustly. I think maybe that's something we can look at on your agenda. But thank you very much for your service, and I'm pleased to vote aye.
Saltzman.
Yes, thanks for agreeing to serve again. Aye.
Wheeler.
Well, I just want to share my appreciation. So many of these committees are dependent upon volunteers who want to step up and have a level of expertise and interest in the issue. And that not only lends accountability to the process that you're engaged in, I think it's just fantastic that we have people who live here who want to be engaged at this level. So thank you again for your service. I vote aye. The report is accepted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please call 1305.
1305, accept bid of McClure and Sons, Inc. for the Columbia Boulevard wastewater treatment plant renewable natural gas facility project for $9,679,676.
Commissioner Fish.
Mayor, the utilities have a lot of capital projects underway. We'll be building a filtration plant just outside the Bull Run. We'll be doing a substantial upgrade to the Columbia wastewater facility plant. We'll be planting a new pipe under the Willamette River. We're working on 2 historic reservoirs and big projects, and given Congress's appetite for new regulations, who knows what lies in the future. But we have a lot of work going on. One of the projects that I'm especially proud of is before us today. This is the next big step in what we've called Poop to Power, a project that we brought to council a little while ago. And as you may recall, you authorized the Bureau of Environmental Services to move forward on a very innovative plan to convert the balance of our methane waste from the city's sewage treatment process into renewable natural gas. And to put it plainly, instead of burning that excess methane, which goes against all of our environmental principles and goals, as we have done, the city will capture this methane and convert it into clean fuel, taking us to 100% recovery. This project is a triple win for Portland. We're cutting greenhouse gas pollution. We're replacing dirty diesel used in trucks and generating, and most important, we have the potential to generate substantial revenue for our ratepayers. The contract before us today will build out the core infrastructure to make the project possible. And with us today to give us a very brief presentation is Larry Palat, Interim Chief Procurement Officer, and Paul Sudo, who's the manager of this project for BES, and who's going to give us just a little bit of historical background before Larry gives us the numbers. Welcome.
Okay, good day. It's morning or afternoon right now. It seems like we're right on noon. Paul Sudo, I'm interim principal engineer with BES. So we are excited to come before you for this contract award. If you might recall, the project has kind of a three-pronged approach, building the facility at Columbia Boulevard to take our waste gas that's produced in breaking down the city's sewage into a renewable natural gas. That's what this contract is for. Then we have other 2 key parts. One is to have an actual fueling station at the Columbia Boulevard wastewater treatment plant so we can actually beneficially use this fuel locally. And then the other part is to connect to the Northwest Natural system so we can distribute this fuel within the city or even beyond the city's boundaries as a revenue source. So our kind of message for that has been it's a fantastic revenue opportunity for the city. We're estimating about $3 million in net revenue per year in this project, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions by about $21,000. So just briefly, we're on track with this contract award, and the fueling station at Columbia Boulevard is currently under construction. So we expect to have that operational by sometime in January.
Thank you. Larry, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. I believe this is the first time I've actually had a project that had the word poop in the title, but that's fine. I did catch your reference to brief. I will be. You have the procurement report before you recommending a contract with McClure and Sons for the facility, $9,679,676. The engineer's estimate was $9 million. That makes this just about 6.8% over the engineer's estimate, which on something this new and this different probably is pretty good. Portland Bureau of Environmental Services and Procurement Service identified at our standard 20% goal. There is currently a total of $818,048, 8.45%. DMWSB certified subcontractor participation. It's lower than we like, but the work itself is very, very specialized. It's the makeup of the participation is a DBE at $683,718. One ESB at just short of $80,000, and MBE at $15,000, and W at just short of $40,000. McClure & Sons located in Portland. They are not a state certified DMWBS contractor, but they are in compliance with all of our contracting regulations. If you have questions about the process, I'd certainly happy to answer them.
Just one comment. I'm actually very pleased that there is so much money for electrical and something other. What we often get in these is simply just hauling or some other function.
Very true.
I will say this, colleagues. We do have a couple of projects in the pipeline, like with the Willamette River pipe, which are such highly specialized work in terms of who can do the work and under what circumstances, that it's going to put a strain on our MW and hitting our utilization goals. Not an excuse, and we'll continue to try to do better. But the more specialized the work, it's a little more complicated unless the prime contractor, unless we are working with prime contractors that have done a better job developing those strategic partnerships in their work. And I think that is something, Larry, we need to continue to look at.
I agree, Commissioner. We are working at this, and we've had some conversations with McClure. In fact, McClure found an ESB, which may or may not be a minority-owned firm. They found them on their own. The piping insulation piece at $80,000 wasn't even an identified area for subcontracting, so they are working at it, and we are having additional conversations with them to see if we can kind of maybe nudge this up in a couple of other areas. But as you mentioned, there really is very little in this of the standard trucking, hauling, grubbing kind of work. This is pretty specialized, certified firm work. It's good stuff.
So will there be opportunities or a requirement for apprenticeships as part of the cost of this?
The workforce rules apply to this, yes, ma'am.
So hopefully that will then train up folks, women and people of color who might be then able to bid in the future.
It does lend itself to that in the past legislation by your group. The 1% fees and things is going to blend into that very nicely. So,
Commissioner Fritz, I did a back of the envelope rough estimate, and given the new guideline, the updated community benefits agreement that we've passed, and the hard trigger above $25 million, we estimate that somewhere between $400 and $500 million of projects are in the pipelines with the utilities. One of the reasons why we've asked the mayor to convene a very high-level group of people internally, CFO, CAO, people like that, so to make sure that we're really getting it right, because it's gonna mostly fall within the utilities in terms of implementation, and we wanna be faithful to what the council has directed.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, gentlemen.
More questions?
Now we'll just see if there's any testimony.
Any testimony on this item?
This is a report. We don't set up a sign-up sheet.
Very good. I'll take a motion.
Move to accept the report.
Second.
We have a motion from Saltzman, a second from Fritz. Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Oh, well, thank you for the presentation. Commissioner Fish, if you have not already, I encourage you to trademark poop to power. I think like the Portland Blues, who may be able to sell the concept elsewhere and cash in on it, because it certainly catches the attention. And thank you for this really innovative program, which I hope will capture the attention of the nation. Aye.
Fish.
Commissioner Fritz, I wish you hadn't said that, because it was actually the inspiration of my then 12-year-old. I prefer not to share the proceeds with him, but
You're possibly in charge of it now.
we'll take this out of the official record. No need to tell Chapin. We're very proud, Mayor, to do our part to advance the climate action goals of the city. A lot of work had been done with methane gas. This is the last chapter of the stuff that was actually burned off. And the fact that we can use it to put clean, renewable energy into our system and then sell it in the marketplace and generate a return for our ratepayers is really great. And as Larry said, the low end is we're looking at maybe $3 million. But if the market for this resource stays strong, it could actually be substantially more than that. We're being cautious in our estimates, so we're not overselling. Thank you for your presentation, gentlemen. Aye.
Saltzman.
Yeah, this is great work, Commissioner Fish and BES and everybody else involved. I mean, it really is taking a resource that's otherwise causing climate change and putting it to a productive use for all of us. So good work. Aye.
Wheeler.
This is definitely number one for number two. I vote aye. The report's accepted. So we're skipping around here. I still think, I'm actually very optimistic. Can we go to 1303 next, please? Thank you, gentlemen. Is there something else?
Well, there was 1306 right behind this, but if
That's a Smart Park Garage, that's not ours.
you want to do 1306?
P-Bot's here, and if it pleases you guys, it's great.
You know what, you're sitting here. Let's go to 1306. We'll get to 1302 in a
Thank you.
minute. Thanks.
1306,
Commissioners, oh, sorry.
accept guaranteed maximum price of $17,885,767 from Balfour Beatty Construction LLC, doing business as Howard S. Wright, for the construction of the 10th and Yamhill Smart Park Garage project.
All right, hello again, gentlemen.
Good morning. Go ahead. I'll
Good
defer
morning.
to Larry for the.
Again, Larry Palat, Procurement Services. Hopefully, again, the short version, this is the procurement report for the GMP contract to Howard S. Wright for the 10th and Yamhill Smart Park Garage, $17,885,767. August 2016, you approved the ordinance for us to go out and do a competitive, an alternative contracting solicitation. We have done that. The proposals were received, evaluated by a 5-member committee, including a member of the MEP program. Portland Bureau of Transportation and Procurement Services looked at our kind of standardized aspirational goal of 20%. PBOT increased that to 23%. Currently, there is an identified total of certified firm subcontracting at $3,510,866, which actually fully and loaded up is at 24.76%. DBE at 82,000, ESB at 216, MBE at 1.4 million, and WB at just a little bit short of 2 million. Balfour Beatty, Howard S. Wright is located in Portland, Oregon. They're not a state certified firm. They do have a current City of Portland business license and in compliance with all of our contracting requirements. Questions about the process, and I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, Dave Benson's here from PBOT.
Good morning, Commissioners. I can give you some brief information if you'd like, or for respect to your time, I could just answer questions.
I guess I would have one question. We've been getting a lot of community feedback on the 10th and Yamhill Garage project about what potentially happens down the road to the commercial properties. And I assume that in accepting this report and moving forward with the construction, that is completely distinct from whatever Prosper Portland decides down the road in terms of the tenants.
Yeah, one of the goals of the project, as you know, was to create a downtown retail hub with high-quality, affordable spaces for local Portland brands and offer their wares in the central city. And so as part of that, we're engaging in a master lease agreement with Prosper Portland so they can ensure that happens. And so there's access to these spaces by local brands.
Right. But just to be clear for the record, we're not settling that question today. This is simply for the construction.
Yes, that's going to be an ongoing question moving forward. That is not settled here today.
Thank you.
I'll accept a motion.
So moved.
Second. Commissioner Fish moves. Commissioner Saltzman seconds. Please call the roll.
Thank you for your work. Aye.
Fish?
Thank you. Aye.
Saltzman?
Thank you. Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Call 1303, please.
Authorize a grant agreement with Apano Communities United Fund not to exceed $100,000 to support a part of the capital campaign to build a cultural center and permanent home for Apano.
Colleagues, this is funding for a grant agreement that was passed earlier during this year's budget process for an affordable housing and community project in the Jade District for Apano. This is a project that I believe the council strongly supports. However, we have amended the agreement to clarify that Apano will report back to us the results of their investigation into allegations of discrimination, something that we as a council take very seriously. I want to thank Apano for taking the right steps to address these allegations, and I want to ask Mr. Duncan Wong to tell us a little bit more about the project.
Yes, and I
For the record, my name is Kara Carmesino, and I'll be standing in for Duncan.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. So my name is Kara Carmesino.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
I just remembered something as well. A little bit of house cleaning before we get to this. I need a motion to substitute the exhibit.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll on the substitute.
And this is to add that extra clause.
This is to fix Exhibit A. Correct.
To be clear, we're just conforming the grant agreement to our existing city policies and setting up a reporting requirement, and I join the mayor in complimenting Apano for hiring Lisa DeZono to do an investigation and then report back to the community. Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The substitute exhibit is accepted. Sorry to interrupt. I apologize.
No problem. Good afternoon. My name is Kara Carmesino. I'm here with my colleague Colin Crater and our board member Jean Yamamoto, who will also be available to answer questions, and we will be brief in our presentation. So I currently work as the Director of Programs at Apano Communities United Fund. I also live just east of the J District in Lentz, so I see every day the pressures facing these neighborhoods as public and private investments set the stage for rapid change. And as we all know, 82nd Avenue, where the J District is located, is on the forefront of this change. So we're really here today to thank you for your investment in the Roots to Rise campaign, which will support a 48-unit affordable housing complex on the corner of 82nd and Division, as well as a community cultural center on the first floor. This development is the result of 4 years of community-led planning and multilingual outreach. At the current site is the old furniture store, which Apano has been operating as a de facto cultural center for the past few years. In just the last year, we've had 25,000 people come to the building for various events, illustrating the need for a community center in the area that's permanent. When we talk about neighborhood investments, I want to be clear about what they mean to us. They're not just the streets, but the people who cross them, not just the businesses in the area owned by immigrant families, but the communities that they anchor in place. Likewise, this is not just an investment in a building, but the people who will inhabit it. People like Jessica, a tenant in the neighborhood who recently spoke at our groundbreaking, who sees this project as one solution to reduce some of her worries about being able to afford to stay in the neighborhood if her rent in her current building increases. When completed, this building will be a safe space for neighbors to gather to organize, plan, and be in community, just as people dreamed about 4 years ago during the community visioning process. The space will continue to house cultural events and community gatherings. It will also be a hub for crucial community services. This will include tenant protection services in partnership with the Community Alliance of Tenants and workforce navigation services in partnership with Southeast Works. Small immigrant-owned businesses will also have support through the Prosper Portland Inclusive Business Network. So it's really not just a building, but what that building makes possible: family stability, community, art, learning, leadership, entrepreneurship, access to resources, and community connections. We know there's no magic bullet for addressing problems that residents face throughout East Portland, but we can begin to address these issues together, guided by community vision. Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. My name is Jean Yamamoto, and I am a member of the Apano and the Apano Communities United Fund. We take very seriously some of the allegations on discrimination, and we do have a process in place to take in any concerns with the staff, which goes to the executive director. If there are concerns about the board, then that goes to the board chairs. The extra step that we've taken in hiring an outside independent community liaison, Elisa DeZono, is something we put in place because we take the allegations very, very seriously. As a board, we do have an obligation, a responsibility to ensure that the governance of Apano is strong and that we have oversight over the executive director and his actions. And so we have opened up this separate process with Elisa DeZono to not only take in community concerns and issues, but she also is charged with reaching out to those who have already expressed some concerns. She will be conducting a full investigation, including interviews, review of our Apano's internal policies and procedures, and make recommendations in a report to the board in executive session in January. We have been asked about why this is such a quick process, and we felt that there is an urgency to complete the investigation. So she will be, excuse me, she will be accepting input from the community and through the end of December, preparing the report in January, and reporting back to the board by the end of January.
Excellent, thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate that very much.
And one more thing I'd like to add is that the board does not have any preconceived or predetermined outcomes of this report. We are open to any and all recommendations, and we will take appropriate action.
Thank you. That's exactly the right attitude to have, so thank
Thank
you
you.
for that. Good morning. Or afternoon,
Good
sorry.
afternoon.
Yes.
Just for the sake of time, I'm just going to give a brief update on the capital campaign status on the financial side. So we're about to close on the cold shell, which is basically the foundation and the walls. Tenant improvements come later, and that's $1.2 million that we're ready to write as a check within the next week or so, and we're very excited to move forward on the project. And for the total construction cost for the capital campaign will be roughly $2.1 million. And so we have, currently, we have about $1.5 million in commitments for coming up soon, and another $1 million or so in current outstanding asks to funders and community partners. So if you have any more questions, I'm more than happy to answer them or field them as best as I can.
Just a quick question, where is Apano going to be located while the building is being done?
So currently we are located still in our current offices. And so the Jade Apano Multicultural Space is that furniture store. So it's two separate sites. And so the redevelopment is on that current furniture store on the second. So it doesn't disrupt our current operations. What it does disrupt is the accessibility of that space during the construction period. And so we're looking into alternative resources to support the community in that regard.
Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I just want to comment on the next step that you're taking in terms of the investigation. You know, Apano is very highly regarded by this city, and it's reflected in the appropriation that was in the mayor's budget, the special appropriation, and then the additional resources. And Commissioner Daly is not here, but she was also very obviously a strong supporter of this grant. We have a process in place under what's called 2.02. It's the city policy that governs alleged workplace misconduct. I urge you to take a look at that, because one of the things that your outside counsel is going to do is determine the adequacy of your existing policies and procedures. And one of the testifiers noted that staff complaints and concerns will be reported to the executive director. One of the things that 2.02 makes clear is that there has to be multiple layers of opt-out. I'm not saying that there's a specific, I don't know whether there's a specific concern about the executive director, but someone has to have the option of going to someone else if they choose to. And 2.02 is the most comprehensive policy of its kind of any municipality. So I urge you to take a look at that. I appreciate that the report you're going to get from Ms. DeZono, a distinguished lawyer from a distinguished family, will go to the board on executive session. I'm hoping that a version of that report that takes out anything that would otherwise violate privacy rights of people who brought complaints, because that has to be balanced very carefully. But that portion of the report that addresses your policies, your procedures, what you've learned, the remedial steps you're going to take, if any, I think that is exactly what the council will want to see coming out of Apano, and how you address this matter. And you know, this is a timely issue, and we are all learning new things about these issues. And I want to say I'm pleased that you're dealing with it in a forthright way and in a public way. And we look forward to the report.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And may I clarify as well, the report that Ms. Ozono will be presenting to the board is the first step, and that is pretty much the fact-finding piece of this, and a recommendation for, you know, once does the review of our personnel policies and other procedures in place, she will then be recommending other action steps, which we will be considering. We are also very committed to hearing the voices of our community, and so there will be another step taking to open it up for a process that will, you know, restore the trust back in Napano, and to make sure that all voices are heard equally, and give people the opportunity to come back together.
That sounds great. And again, just to be clear about what our requirement is, in the grant agreement, we're going to need a report to show compliance with the non-discrimination provisions and the contractual requirements, and you're well underway in taking a very bold step towards that end. So
thank you. Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any public testimony on this item?
Unless Colin Crater, is that?
Those three names are us.
Okay.
I'm Colin.
Very good. Please
Then
call the
that's
roll.
Fritz.
It's a very exciting project. That's what we've got to focus on, and this money is going to help the community in building that centre, so thank you. Aye.
Fish.
Thank you for being here today. Aye.
Saltzman.
Yeah, this is a great project, good location for the community, but also much needed affordable housing too. Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Grant agreement's approved. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm told 1301 and 1314 will not take very long, so let's go ahead and call 1301 and 1314, please.
1301, authorized contribution to the Northwest Transportation Fund to satisfy requirements found in Portland zoning code and qualify for a floor area office use bonus for the ESCO property prior to submittal of a land use review application or building plans. And 1314, amend the boundary of the Northwest 20th Avenue Local Improvement District to accept $500,000 in funding from ESCO Corporation, include and assess property at 2141 Northwest 25th Avenue to fund traffic signal replacement and intersection improvements to the Northwest 23rd Avenue and Northwest Vaughn Street and US Highway 30 intersection.
Very good. And before you begin, I want to ask legal counsel a question that you can think about. Obviously, 1301 is a non-emergency first reading of an ordinance, and the appropriate action at the end of this is to move it to second reading. 1314 is indicated as a hearing ordinance, and I just want to make sure that rather than, do we take a provisional vote on that, or do we also move that to second reading? And I don't need an answer right now, but when we get to the end of this, if you could let me know, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. I'm Andrew Abbey, Local Improvement District Administrator. Joining me today is
Matt Wickstrom with the Bureau of Development Services.
Thank you. So I think the intent, and I'll defer to council on this, would just to simply have first readings on both and then pass them to a second reading next week. We had 40 minutes allocated on the council agenda for both agenda items. I'm going to aim to try to wrap it up much closer to 40 seconds. So we did not receive any remonstrances against the expanded LID boundary, and I just passed out a letter of support to Carla from ESCO Corporation. They're pleased to be part of this. Just very quickly, the business case for this is that we're working very hard to try to keep the Northwest 20th Avenue LID within budget. Council approved a traffic signal replacement this summer, and the additional funding from ESCO allows us, when we're tearing up a very high-profile intersection like the off-ramp from Highway 30, it allows us to fully complete the improvements in one fell swoop and not leave something undone, so that when ESCO might come in the door later to redevelop, that they would be conditioned to make further intersection improvements to that intersection where we already have a lot of delays. So it's just basically front-loading a little bit of ESCO money so we can get the intersection done properly first time around. This, as Matt will share with you, this doesn't waive any land use requirements or anything of that nature. It's just a pre-funding of the infrastructure improvements. The one amendment that I would like council to consider is I was wondering if we could just simply, on agenda item 1301, append the auditor project number to the ordinance title to make it a little easier to pull up that ordinance after it's adopted by council. So that would just simply be appending the C-10049 auditor project number, which is already on agenda item 1314. So if that would meet with the pleasure of council, it would be good to
I'll move that amendment.
Second.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Saltzman, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Please call the roll on the amendment.
Fritz?
That's a very good amendment. Thank you. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman? Aye. Wheeler?
Aye.
Mayor, can I just make an observation?
Yes.
We have a letter before us here from Christy White, noted attorney, and I'm looking at her signature on the letter, and it actually reminded me, it looks like a series of curlicues. There is no discernible definition here. I could not make out her name. But I also just saw a formal document the mayor signed that looked like a fence holding back the beach. It had a series of vertical lines, but they didn't seem to have any relationship to each other, and they had a curl at the end. So I think Christy White and the mayor could have a competition for the most creative use of signatures.
So Commissioner Fish has actually gotten to a really interesting trivia matter. I actually don't sign the documents Ted Wheeler, I sign them Edward Wheeler, because that's how I learned how to sign. And so even though my official title and name is Ted Wheeler, I actually am signing it differently, and that's why the letters look different. That's my excuse at any rate. Sounds great.
I don't mean to rain on your parade, Mayor, but I couldn't discern a Ted or an Ed.
Yeah, it's pretty awful.
Just looked like a series of sticks arranged sideways.
You can always tell when we're over 3 hours into the hearing, can't you?
Mayor, I would be happy to buy both you and Christie some Arby's Curly Q French fries.
And I accept. That would be fantastic.
So moving back to the matter at hand, are we prejudging whether the land use application will be approved or not?
No, that's a good question. And there's a line in the ordinance that says that there's no guarantee that the land use application would be approved.
And what happens if it's not?
If it's not, then the ordinance also specifies that the funds can go toward other improvements that would be required as part of the project.
Under the current zoning?
Exactly.
And
I should also point out that 1301 spelled out all the frontage improvements to which ESCO may be subject to in the future, so that's clearly spelled out. And I think NWDA, if I may say so, I really like the prospective guidance. You know, everybody's going into this with some guidance before the redevelopment happens, and just sort of, I think, helps set the stage for a more successful transportation and land use process down the line.
And is the land use, is the zone change coming through the quasi-judicial process or through the comprehensive plan?
So the comprehensive plan update is changing the comprehensive plan designation, and then the actual zoning map would be changed through a quasi-judicial process.
Thank you very much.
Any public testimony on these items?
No one signed up.
Legal counsel, did you come to a concurrence that these both move to second reading?
So these are both non-emergencies and would pass the second reading at a date and time to be determined.
Very good. So for item 1301, this is the first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Item 1314 is the first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It also moves to second reading. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And our last bit of business today is also a second reading. Could you please call item 1304?
Authorized disposal of surplus Taser X26 electronic control weapons, holsters, cartridges, and batteries, and authorize the Portland Police Bureau to proceed with donation and/or sale of the property.
Colleagues, this is a item which we had taken up previously. We received extensive public testimony on this. Unless there's other questions, I'll call the question. Is there anything else you'd like to say, sir?
Commissioner Fritz had asked if any parts were recyclable if we destroyed them, and I contacted Axon, and they said no, just the manufacturing process. The internals are bonded to the external part of the handle, and it's just, we can, they did offer that we could ship them back at our expense, and they would dispose of them, but how generous,
right?
how generous, yeah.
Well, thank you for finding out. I really
Correct.
appreciate that.
The only other issue was there was some concern about what happens to them after we donate them if council approves. We can certainly add language to our hold harmless that at the completion of the service life of the handle, they will be destroyed or disposed of appropriately.
Or
Just destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Very good. Please call the roll.
Fritz.
Thank you for being here today and for being patient. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Thanks for your patience in being here.
Thank you, council.
Ordinance is approved. With that, we are adjourned until 2 p.m.
That's pretty impressive, 5 minutes over.